بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أخلق بالخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Al-Imam Abdul Wahhab al-Sha'rani rahimahullah ta'ala, who passed away in the year 973 Hijri. He was a wali of Allah, an imam of tasawwuf, alongside being a faqih, a muhaddith, a mufassir, a mutakallim. In fact, he even has a work on medicine. He said about the time in which he lived, نحن الآن في دحليز القيامة, that we are now living in the dahliz to qiyamah. Dahliz is a term that means the hallway that separates the front of the house to the first door in the house. Meaning he was expressing it's a short distance from his time to Yawm al-Qiyamah. And he wrote this in the context of the mass proliferation and the fire-like spread of charlatan sheikhs of tariqah in his time. What we would call fake pirs, fake spiritual leaders. He saw it as such an epidemic and cancer in his society. He said, we are in dahlizul qiyamah. That qiyamah cannot be far if this is the state of the people we're living amongst today. Accordingly, he wrote an entire work challenging the claims and the culture that these people bred, which we're going to touch on at the end of today's workshop. But there was virtually not a book that he wrote except he addressed and confronted this fitna. And this was the way of the a'immatul tasawwuf, the imams of tasawwuf and the awliya of Allah. This was their way. Before al-Imam al-Sha'rani, Sidi Ahmad Zarruq rahimahullah. Before him, al-Imam Ibn al-Hajj al-Maliki rahimahullah. All of these a'imma, all of these imams confronted this fitna of people claiming to be shuyukh of tariqah and exploiting that claim to exploit lay vulnerable Muslims. Despite such a frank statement from Imam al-Sha'rani rahimahullah, I don't think any of these a'imma ever anticipated or foresaw the dire situation that we would be in today. Where in our communities, it wouldn't be an understatement to say that the Pir culture or industry or business, whatever you choose to call it, has become one of the greatest cultures that breeds, if not the greatest culture, to breed physical abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, financial and even sexual abuse, wal-'iyadhu billah. It wouldn't be an understatement to say that the Pir culture and the Pir industry is one of the primary causes or the primary cause of the ghafla of our communities. Meaning the spiritual and intellectual inertia and coma that our people have been in for decades, and they don't seem to be snapping out of it. Now in our day and age, when you confront this issue, you address this cancer in our society, you'll receive a response from one of three groups. And these three groups illustrate the shades of attitudes towards this culture. The first group are those who believe blindly in Pirs and the culture around Pirs. These are people in some cases, wal-'iyadhu billah, will even place their iman and Islam at stake to follow their Pir blindly. In a strange way, they're ironically the easiest to deal with because they're playing their hand. They're showing you the deck of cards. They're not being munafiqeen in that regard. They're not being two-faced. You know where they stand. The second group are those who believe in the broad culture, the Pir culture. They believe in some of the khurafat and bid'at that we're going to talk about today. Except to maintain an aura of orthodoxy, they'll selectively place certain individuals on the blacklist. That we believe in the culture, but we don't believe in these people. They're the wrong ones. They're the mashed ones. We're upright and orthodox. The last group are those people who will outwardly, or privately I should say, share the same message that we're going to deliver today. They'll say many of the same things that we're going to say today. Except when you go forth and then you confront this issue in public like we're doing today, they'll say, you know what, this is not a priority for us to discuss. You shouldn't be spending your time on these things. We have bigger issues like Zionism, Palestine, our youth, even though none of these people ever talk about those issues as well. It's in the vein of this last response that really I want to lay the groundwork for this workshop. Because when people say this, when on the one hand they allege to not believe in this culture, and yet they equally don't want it to be exposed, they're undermining the gravity of the crimes that are committed in the name of this culture and this industry. They're undermining the assault and abuse that happens on a daily basis in the homes of vulnerable lay Muslims because they've fallen prey to this culture. So before I get into actually introducing the workshop and the main body of the workshop, I actually want to read some accounts of abuse that have occurred in the UK at the hands of charlatans, where the perpetrators have been convicted, to demonstrate what we're dealing with, to make this as visceral a reality for you and I as I can. And I'll say from the very outset, in fact I'll even apologize, because a lot of the details you're going to hear are very graphic. They detail physical and sexual abuse, sometimes against minors and women, wal-'iyadhu billah. But until we don't talk about this, we're never going to realize the gravity of what we're dealing with. And then how many people are potentially suffering in silence because nobody is willing to address this. So again, I apologize, and I certainly found these accounts upsetting the first time I heard them, so I apologize if they upset you when you hear them. So I've placed these in chronological order to show how long the span is of this fitna. The first case is something which occurred in 1991. So this is from a newspaper article. The title of the article is "Girl Beaten to Death to Drive Out Demons." An Asian girl was battered and kicked to death in a bloody ritual as holy men tried to exorcise her of an evil demon named John Wayne. 20 was beaten at her parents' home in St. Thomas Street, North Oldham, over 8 days. Manchester Crown Court was told yesterday. 2 holy men were trying to rid her of the evil spirit or Jinn that was believed to be possessing her body, Mr. Richard Henriquez told the jury. The first man, 55 of MacLeod Street, Nelson, who is not related to the dead girl, denies murder. The second man, 63 of Charlotte Street, Blackburn, pleads not guilty to conspiring to cause the girl grievous and actual bodily harm. Mr. Henriquez said that Kausar had developed behavioral problems after leaving school. She threatened to jump from windows but was discharged after treatment by a psychiatrist. But her parents believed she had not been cured. They decided to turn from medicine to other means in an endeavor to cure their daughter, said Mr. Henriquez. A friend of her father's recommended she see one of these individuals, who was considered to have certain holy powers. On their second visit, an aunt saw her write the name John Wayne on a piece of paper. At that time, they believed that was the name of the demon that had possessed Kausar. Mr. Henriquez described the 8 days of violence and starvation inflicted upon the girl by the individual, from the first individual of the two, from Monday, June the 10th, until she died in the early hours of Tuesday, June the 18th. During that time, Bashir beat with a heavy glass ashtray, with a walking stick, which broke into 2 parts, and with his fists. Members of family reported that blows were rained down upon the girl for 2 hours at a time by the individual. During the beatings, the individual claimed to be addressing the evil spirit which he said was in. On the Thursday evening, the second man had told the first to continue the treatment but don't beat her up anymore. On the Sunday, the first man was seen punching neck, in the ribs, on the arms and shoulders. On Monday, June the 17th, Quant watched as the first man punched all over her body, grabbed her hair with great force and punched her. By this time, she had not eaten for 8 days or slept for 4 days. Later that day, the first individual continuously punched her stomach and chest, then jumped on her chest. Mr. Henriquez said that the final attack was at 1:30 a.m. on the Tuesday morning. The first individual hit her in the stomach with great force, punched her on both sides of her ribs for about 25 to 30 minutes. After that, breathed 3 times and went quiet. Bashir was alleged to have said, "The demon has gone, but he killed the girl." He told the family that if anyone asked, they were to say that the demon pushed down the stairs. Mr. Henriquez said when police searched the second individual's home in Blackburn, they found a number of documents. Among them was one which said, "I will free and leave proof in an hour's time, signed G. Wayne." This is now from a second article which details in horrific and harrowing detail exactly what injuries this poor lady sustained. The horror of final agony. A young Asian woman suffered horrific injuries in a severe beating up to 3 days before she died. An inquest was told that 22-year-old had been jumped or stamped on and 15 of her ribs were broken. Her body was found last week in a back room of her home on St. Thomas Street in Oldham. Male members of her family sat in silence as her appalling injuries were catalogued to the court. Her arms and both legs from feet to knee were badly bruised, and her stomach and breasts were covered in large red marks. Several groups of pinpoint cuts also covered her body. She had also been cut above her left eye, across her right breast, and had 3 dried cuts between her breasts. She had been cut on her scalp and had a gaping wound running back from her hairline when one of her ribs punctured her lungs. Home Office pathologist Edmund Trapp said the injuries to her ribs and lungs were consistent with her being jumped or stamped upon. Death would have been a few hours of that happening. She received a severe beating during the 2 or 3 days prior to her death, and her injuries are compatible to her being hit by a fixed stick. Other injuries could have been caused by her being punched or kicked. She may also have been hit by an object with a sharp edge. The inquest heard that 2 knives and a cricket bat were found in the house. A piece of walking stick was found in the backyard, and in a further search, police found another piece of old walking stick behind a fridge freezer. They discovered Gord's body in a black room covered with a blanket. Her uncle, who lived next door, identified his niece. Coroner Dennis Everett was told that several people were in the house, and at one point 30 people, mourning loudly, were crammed into the back downstairs room. Chief Inspector Jeffrey Isaacs told the court that a man has been charged with murder. The inquest was adjourned. And ultimately, both men who were involved with this did go to prison and did serve prison time. Now, what's really sad about this case is when this was recently publicized by Sheikh Asrar, again to the end to make people realize the horrors of what occurs in this culture. The ethnic community that one of these men belongs to became particularly incensed that this was being publicized to protect the image of one of these 2 spiritual healers involved. Let me make it very clear. The second you adopt that way of thinking, the second you think it's okay to actively or passively remain silent on these crimes, you enable a culture of abuse regardless of the circumstances or conditions, regardless of the setting. And remember one thing, we're mentioning this by way of historical fact to learn lessons so they're not repeated again, so that we can show you it's very easy to identify recurring patterns of abuse and manipulation when these things occur. I don't have any personal gain with these people. I don't have anything to lose or benefit from these people. We're not making decisive judgments about their iman or a'mal or what they died upon, their nasab or anything. In fact, that's of no concern to us for the purposes that we're reading this. What's worse still is that this same ethnic community were insistent that there were details we don't know. There was a conspiracy to target one of the men. There was a miscarriage of justice. Let's hypothetically assume all of that is true. There was a miscarriage of justice, the courts conspired to charge these men, etc., etc., etc. Does that change the fact that a woman was buried at the end of it? Does that change the fact that a woman was tortured for 8 days, starved, alone? A sick woman, a young woman who had mental health issues, was tortured for 8 days. Her family buried her body. She had all of these injuries that we spoke about. Does it change that fact? It doesn't change that fact. So when you are silent or passive about this, you enable a culture of abuse, and then you never have any reason, or rather you never have any credibility to ever then go and criticize abuse regardless of where it occurs. Remember, abuse transcends religion. It transcends what group or party or sect you belong to. So let me give you an example to illustrate my point. The Church of Scientology, which is one of the biggest cults in the world. This was a very popular case and arguably one of the worst reputational risks that they ever faced in their history. It was the death of a woman known as Lisa McPherson. And this is the summary of what occurred from the Wikipedia page concerning this case. Lisa McPherson was an American Scientologist who died in the care of the Church of Scientology in Clearwater, Florida. After a minor traffic accident where McPherson seemed unharmed, she removed her clothes in the street and paramedics transported her to a local hospital. In order to avoid psychiatric intervention, local Scientologists convinced her to leave the hospital and seek care at the nearby Church of Scientology Flag Service Organization, FSO. There, she was held against her will for 17 days without any medical care, while her physical and mental condition rapidly deteriorated and she died. Following the report by the state medical examiner that indicated that McPherson was a victim of negligent homicide, FSO was indicted on 2 felony charges: abuse and or neglect of a disabled adult, and practicing medicine without a license. The charges were dropped after the state's medical examiner changed the cause of death from undetermined to an accident on June 13th, 2000. A civil suit brought by McPherson's family was settled on May 28th, 2004. So the actual judgment at the end was that the case was dropped because it was deemed an accident. Though senior members of the church who left, like Mike Rinder, who died a number of years ago, he was one of the most senior members of the Church of Scientology. He left and he wrote a book, A Billion Years. He always maintained that there was something suspicious behind the death of Lisa McPherson. And he says, though I don't believe this is ever proven in a court of law, that the person who was individually and specifically responsible for overseeing the well-being of Lisa McPherson was David Miscavige himself, meaning the head of Scientology himself. So Mike Rinder and many other members of the church who left maintained that it was actually David Miscavige that was overseeing the treatment of this woman. Now again, people who are unwilling to speak about the former case and call it out for what it is, what right would they have to criticize what happened here? What would they say? But these are kuffar. But this abuse has nothing to do whether a person was a kafir or a Muslim. And if you're going to say that these were kuffar, well then you were Muslim. How did it go wrong in the case that you are Muslim? Meaning it should be the case as Muslims we say, these are kuffar, it was a cult, they have wacky beliefs. So you would expect something like this to happen. But then what's the excuse when somebody is a Muslim and alleges to do this in the name of Islam, tasawwuf and spirituality? Secondly, you can see there are recurring patterns when abuse and manipulation occurs. You had a person who was clearly unwell. The more detailed accounts mentioned she had this minor accident, she stripped naked and she started to walk. Some accounts say that she alleged or confessed to somebody that the reason she did so is because she wanted psychiatric help. She recognized she was unwell, and that was the only way she would get it. The Church of Scientology sees psychiatry as evil, and any concept or notion of helping people who have mental health issues as being evil if done under proper medical care. L. Ron Hubbard had a number of strange ways in which he alleged to cure people of illnesses and vices they had. So for example, he said if somebody is a drug addict, he would prepare, they had like a bathtub. There was a particular chemical they would put in it, and they said if you soak them in there long enough, they'll give up the drug addiction. So my point being in mentioning this, and I'll be mentioning instances like this throughout, that there are common patterns that occur here. What we're calling out is something which is bigger than protecting the identity of a single person, or a single community, or a single culture. But to carry on. Second case, 2012, Naila Mumtaz, rahimahullah. This is a BBC News article, and this is a bit closer to home. This is something which happened in Birmingham. Naila Mumtaz murder, 4 family members jailed for life. A man who murdered his pregnant wife has been jailed for life along with 3 other family members. And then they mentioned their family members. Birmingham Crown Court heard Mrs. Mumtaz's in-laws thought she was possessed by evil spirits. The trial heard evidence that Mrs. Mumtaz was killed during attempts to render her unconscious as family members attempted to drive out a harmful jinn spirit. Mrs. Mumtaz, who was pronounced dead in hospital, was 6 months pregnant and had moved to the UK in 2008 after an arranged marriage in Pakistan. Her body was found by paramedics in a bedroom at the family home after they were called to the property in the early hours of 8th of July 2009. Sentencing the 4 members of the family, all of Handsworth Wood, the judge at Birmingham Crown Court told them that they had betrayed Mrs. Mumtaz. Mumtaz, who had to be helped out of the dock by his father, the woman's husband, was jailed for a minimum of 13 years. And then it mentions the sentences of these individuals. But this is the important bit. Possible motives for the offence raised during the trial were that the defendants believed Naila's unborn child was not her husband's, or that she was possessed by a jinn sent from Pakistan. The judge, Mr. Justice Keith, said it was unlikely the defendants believed Naila was pregnant by another man. He said, the other possibility explored in the course of the trial about why Naila was smothered was that the defendants believed that Naila had been possessed by a jinn, which had been sent from Pakistan by Naila's parents, and that they smothered her in order to get rid of the jinn. The judge said, I regard this as a less unlikely explanation for what happened. Imagine how crazy this is, that the cop-out is to say, I think my wife was an adulteress and bore another man's child. That's the cop-out. And the judge is saying that I don't think that's a likely reason you murdered her. The more likely reason is you believed she had a jinn in her. Jurors were told that numerous telephone calls were made to Naila's relatives in Pakistan, the emergency services and other individuals in the hours before she was taken to hospital. During the calls, it was alleged Ul-Haq claimed that a spirit had been sent from Pakistan, while a female at the house was allegedly heard to say, don't call an ambulance yet, we will cure her ourselves. In his account to police, Mumtaz maintained that injuries to his wife's body were self-inflicted and claimed that a person was present at the house praying to get the spirit out of her. Same thing again. A third case, 2016, this is an ITVX article. And again, I apologize for the language and the nature of it, but we have to talk about these things. Spiritual healer jailed for tricking a woman into having sex with him. A spiritual healer has been jailed for 12 years for tricking a woman into having sex with him. The man claimed that this would cure her marriage problems, and he also conned the mum into handing over £6,000. The 30-year-old from Stetchford in Birmingham was found guilty of 2 charges of rape and 1 of fraud following a trial at Birmingham Crown Court. Judge Patrick Thomas QC also ordered the man to pay the victim £10,000 in compensation. He was also ordered to register as a sex offender for life. The court heard how the woman, who had been married for 3 years and had a young son, was having difficulties in her marriage. She was introduced by a friend to the man in June last year, and he offered to take steps to purify her relationship with her husband. The ritual involved sacrificing a goat and getting her to perform daily readings. When she visited his home and told him that nothing had changed, he told her that there were more rituals to be carried out, and part of the process involved having sex with him. Wal-'iyadhu billah. He denied having sex or taking any money from her. The judge told the man this was a vile set of offences. You abused the high. You took advantage of her both sexually and financially. You fought the case and made her go through in public the humiliation of describing what happened to her. Judge Patrick Thomas, QC. Again, if we go and toe the party line like these people do, and we push the narrative of we have to protect the culture, we don't want to defame or bring into disrepute our people, then how can these people condemn or criticize something like the following case? Papa B, this is from BBC News, a relatively recent case. This is a kafir, a Christian, I believe a Christian. Elder Papa B jailed for rape and sexual assault. A man who ran a store in Brixton and was seen as an elder of the community has been sentenced to a 9-year jail term for rape and sexual assault. Bernard Williams, 77, ran the original product store in Market Row, southwest London for more than 30 years and was well known in the community. Williams convinced a woman who came to his shop seeking spiritual treatment of his healing capability to spend more than £13,000 in remedies. He then told her she needed to have sex to remove spirits inside her, the Metropolitan Police said. Following an 8-day trial, Williams was convicted of 1 count of rape and 2 counts of sexual assault at Harrow Crown Court on Friday. Inspector Tom Palmer, who led the Met's investigation, said Williams' offending is shocking. He abused the trust of the victim, which was built on the respect he had gained within the community, to get close to them and commit the offences. He added, I would like to commend the victim on her strength throughout the investigation and thank her for her support throughout the court processes. According to police, the victim, who cannot be named for legal reasons, became unwell in November 2020 and visited his shop after she was recommended spiritual treatment. Williams told her she had a spirit inside her which would eventually kill her. He slowly persuaded her of his ability to heal, leading her to buy a guard ring and healing bath, and to have her mother's home cleansed of spirits, all of which cost her and her family more than £13,000. The defendant then started telling her she needed to have sex to remove the spirit. On the 12th of January 2021, William showed up at the victim's house to anoint her and sexually assaulted and raped her, the Met said. After the attack, the defendant maintained contact with the woman and eventually told her the process had not worked and that the spirit had returned. If you don't consider the religion of both perpetrators in both cases, what's the difference from one and the other? There's no difference between one and the other. Another case, 2024, Lancashire, Hashim Lodi, a Muslim man. Burnley man said he had healing abilities to sexually abuse girls. A man who claimed he had spiritual healing abilities abused his power to sexually abuse a teenage girl on multiple occasions. Hashim Lodi, 41, abused the girl at an address in Nelson and performed rituals where he would read passages from the Quran, wal-'iyadhu billah, while she was naked to cleanse her. Astaghfirullah. Preston Crown Court heard the victim's mother had initially approached Lodi in March 2021, as she was led to believe he had healing abilities and could help people who believed they were victims of black magic. Lodi found out the victim was struggling at school and asked his wife, who had no part in the offending, to tutor her. He persuaded the victim to send him naked photographs of herself. This is a young child, a young girl. Tobias Collins, prosecuting, said Lodi would tell the victim she had sinned and that she needed cleansing. On one occasion, he told the victim her stomach was blocked and that she had evil inside her which needed cleaning out. Lodi said that if she did not allow him to continue or break the circle, as he put it, she would end up in a car accident or her mother would be killed. He told his wife, who was at home while the offending took place, that she would be affected by evil spirits if she did not stay in the bedroom while he carried out the acts. In a statement summarized to the court by Mr. Collins, the victim said she had suffered from flashbacks and insomnia since the incidents and had felt powerless. She said, I feel ashamed as he told me I was unclean and impure. This is a young girl, remember, a child. Lodi, now of Brennard Street, Burnley, was found guilty of 4 counts of assault by penetration and 2 accounts of sexual assault at a trial in February. This is probably the most recent case and probably the most disturbing from all of them. Abdul Halim Khan, this is 2026, this article from the BBC, in fact only from a few days ago. The title of the article is, I was sexually assaulted by an imam. He told me he had supernatural powers. Arya was 13 years old when she was sexually assaulted by an imam who told her he was healing her. A respected faith leader at a mosque in East London, Abdul Halim Khan, would tell young girls and their parents they needed curing from bad spirits. After abusing them, he warned the girls that if they told anyone about the abuse, the so-called cure would be undone, they would be cursed, and that harm would come to them and their families from black magic. I genuinely believed he had supernatural powers, says Arya, which is not her real name. She says, Khan told her something really bad would happen to me and my family if she ever spoke about the abuse. And she wasn't the only one. Khan abused 7 women and girls over 11 years in the same way. His youngest victim was just 12. He would convince them to meet in isolated locations, such as a flat or a car. There, he would rape or sexually abuse them while pretending to be a jinn, a supernatural spirit. Khan chose vehicles with tinted windows, gave one victim a phone so he could contact her, and encouraged another to climb out of her bedroom window to meet him. It was Aria's mother who introduced her to Khan. After she began getting into trouble at school, she told her the Imam would give her advice when they met. Khan told her to get into his car. That's when he touched me inappropriately, says Aria. I had my eyes closed and he said there are going to be things that are knocking on the car window. And I did hear those knocks. But obviously I was 13 years old, I was terrified. Khan, 54, has now been given a life sentence with a minimum prison term of 20 years for the horrific attacks. His convictions include 9 counts of rape, as well as further counts of sexual assault and child abuse involving 7 victims from the local Muslim community. Khan carried out the attacks between 2004 and 15, using his power and influence to manipulate his victims into staying silent. Police became aware of his offending in 2018 after his youngest victim told her school therapist about the abuse. It took another 5 years before he was charged. The BBC has spoken to 2 of Khan's victims about their experiences. Farah, also not her real name, met Khan as a child after he convinced her mother she needed healing. Farah says he took advantage of her family. He would make up stories saying, I can see things coming towards you. You need to be protected. I need to protect your daughter. Khan went on to sexually assault Farah, telling her it was part of the cure. She says, Khan's abuse did not make sense to me. I said to myself, this is wrong. She says, you know you're not meant to be touched like this. I was really confused. But I couldn't go back to my family because they wouldn't believe me. Farah did eventually tell her parents as an older teenager, but she says they did not believe her, and then she left the family home. I was not believed by my family. The people I expected to protect and support me instead turned away, blamed me, and continue to do so to this day. She says, I feel as though I'm lost. I question my identity of who I am. Where do I belong? Melissa Garner, a specialist prosecutor who worked on the case for the Crown Prosecution Service, says she has never seen anything quite like Khan's abuse of young girls and women. She says he threatened and brainwashed his victims into believing he was possessed. It was deeply shocking, and when you actually watch the victim's evidence, it's deeply upsetting. Aisha K. Gill, a professor of criminology at the University of Bristol and an expert prosecution witness who gave evidence on the religious background to the case, says that while orthodox Islamic teaching does not endorse black magic, which of course is incorrect, and I'm going to address that in a second, it still retains significant cultural influence. Victims were led to believe that only Khan could protect them and their families from catastrophic supernatural harm, and that withdrawing from his control would expose them to devastating consequences. Professor Gill adds, she says disclosing sexual violence can carry profound risks for Muslim women. Many women are socialized not to discuss private matters outside the family and may internalize shame that properly belongs to the perpetrator, she says. It's this combination of religious authority, spiritual fear, and cultural vulnerability that makes this case particularly distinctive. Lasting impact. Farah says she did not experience a normal childhood, saying she instead learned to endure. Her message to other survivors of abuse is that their worth is not determined by what was done to them, and they are not alone. Surviving does not make you weak, she says. It reflects strength. Although Aria was just a teenager when she was assaulted, it was not until in her 20s that she broke down and told her mother about it. She says the attack has had a lasting impact on her. Sometimes you question, who would I have been as a person if this thing did not happen to me? Inshallah, we'll break for Salatul Asr and then we'll continue afterward. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So we finished before Salatul Asr. We were just talking about, after introducing the topic for today, we were going through accounts of abuse where there have been convictions in the UK and the abuse has occurred under the pretense of spiritual healing, Pirs, Imams alleging they have spiritual powers, young children being abused and raped by these people. For those of you who have come late, the reason I opened with this was to demonstrate, and again to make it a visceral reality for us all, so that we acknowledge how dire the situation is and how horrific the consequences are of us turning a blind eye and neglecting the crimes of this culture. So carrying on that theme of mentioning some of these accounts, remember, abuse doesn't always occur in a physical or sexual way. Some people think that's the threshold. If it's anything short than that, you can turn a blind eye to things. So this is another BBC article. Faith leader Mahbub Akhtar jailed for multi-million-pound fraud. A faith leader who used his role as a spiritual guide to cover up a multi-million-pound property fraud and tax evasion scam has been jailed. Muslim cleric Mahbub Akhtar of Stoke-on-Trent was sentenced along with 9 others, including his wife and daughter. They were found guilty of lying to mortgage lenders to amass nearly £1 million of property in a bid to control and dominate areas of the city. Akhtar was jailed for 14 years at Birmingham Crown Court. Following a trial last month, the 60-year-old of Farman Close in Fenton was convicted of 11 charges, including 5 of conspiracy to commit fraud and cheating HMRC out of £271,000. The court heard how Akhtar, who was also known as Saint Pir Wali Pandar Iman, masterminded the conspiracy over more than a decade between 2003 and 2014. Originally from Pakistan, he was a prominent faith leader in Fenton and helped raise several £million in donations to fight poverty through the area's Darbar Unique Centre, the court heard. But Judge Stephen Ayers said that he had let down his followers. He said, "You use the prestige and devotion of others to facilitate this offending. Your role as a spiritual guide provided cover, and you financed your activities through donations obtained in part because of your spiritual role." The court heard how Akhtar kept his name off most of the paperwork, using his wife, daughter and niece to apply for mortgages. Also, I believe this is from 2013, there's a charity from Rotherham, I believe, a women's charity. They submitted evidence of violence against women and girls to Parliament in 2013 relating to cases of this kind. Now remember, we may not necessarily agree with everything that this charity represents. We're just using what they submitted as evidence to illustrate the point that we're making today. So case study 1. These are all cases of women who went to or were taken to amils and fake rakis. Case study 1, touching inappropriately, mostly breasts, sexual touches, texting at inappropriate times, i.e. 3 a.m. in morning, asking for had any explicit sexual dreams or that you may see this. Abuse, tied down to weightlifting bench, i.e. suffocated as arms, legs tied, mouth, nose, lashing with buckle belt, skull fractures, broken jaws, fractured collarbone, kicking in stomach, ribs, privates, diluting water with bleach, hold nose and forced down throat. Case study 2 had shared sexual abuse as child and violent partner with a male Iraqi. He said her 2 children were possessed. Husband was abroad. He recorded every patient and him being violent towards them. She was advised to report to police, which she did in 2013, September. Currently, police still investigating. Police found other videos of others who he had abused within London and Sheffield. Case study 3. Husband from Bristol, Somalia, and aged in late 40s, referred his 16 to 17-year-old wife from Somalia who did not speak English, so he came with her. They came with another older woman who may have been his first wife. The girl looked petrified. She had been taken to a male Iraqi in the past. Husband shared that she was possessed as she would not let him have his conjugal rights. Recently heard that his wife has disappeared. When saw him next, asked him how she was, he claimed that she has run away. Case study 4. Young girl aged 22-23 has been accompanying her mother who has been receiving therapy from a male Iraqi in Sheffield over a period of 18 months during the treatment. During the treatment, the male Iraqi has made the young woman feel she has special healing powers and thus can heal her mother by just looking at her breast. Her mother suffers from breast cancer, hence the reason for going to the spiritual healer. He has recently insisted that the young woman meet him by herself. Not feeling comfortable with this request, she has not, and thus they sought a female Iraqi, Sheffield case. Case study 5, Derby Iraqi. Beats people, strangles, verbal abuse, that punishment from Allah so can cause harm to them to correct their behavior. 29-year-old woman went to see him with her brother. She was told that there would be another woman present. Instead, when the male Iraqi put his hands around her throat and started to strangle her, she struggled and shouted to her brother to stop him. He called 2 other big burly men into the room who then came and pinned her back. After her brother intervened, they let go. The woman was quite distressed and has not gone back to see this man again, but worries about what he may be doing to others. Case study 6, London, Pakistani. Former police officer now works as Iraqi, only offers therapy for single sisters. He has been sending highly sexual images and asking women, do you visualize this? He has charged a divorcee in excess of £6,000. Case study 7, Luton male Iraqi. He started by touching, then becoming sexual, immediately saying if the jinn in private parts then can attack like this or that. The woman was extremely uncomfortable. When she became aware of her surroundings after having lost all sense of what was taking place, she found her abaya, her clothing jubba, was undone. She had gone alone, she has not gone back. Case study 8, mother came in, insisted that daughter was possessed. On reciting Quran, daughter appeared quite normal, no issues of spiritual possession present. Mother insisted that she had been possessed. Daughter left saying, "Mum, I told you nothing was wrong with me." Mother insistent that Raki must have got it wrong as daughter not okay. It transpired that the daughter was a lesbian. Case study 9. 15-year-old young man, mother insisting that something with him, i.e. spiritually possessed. He feels that being controlled, suffocated, that prevented from going out with friend. Mother feels that people have done things to them, thus controls where he eats, where he goes, so friends not feed him. And lastly, case study 10, Bradford Islamic Madrasa, used to cover, went to college, had boyfriends, stopped covering, refusal by mother to accept the girl is doing what she wants to. Mother insisted she is possessed. Eventually they met with the parents and allowed the couple to get married. So this is the end of, and again I'll say again, I apologize for reading these out and having to go into the graphic detail that was in here. This is the last of the body of accounts like this relating specifically to what we would call to the Pir culture or the healing culture. One of the ridiculous and bizarre responses you often hear from people, like the first example I gave, is that we shouldn't give exposure to these issues because it brings Sunniyat into disrepute. It brings Sunni Islam into disrepute. First things first, I don't believe any of these people are Sunni. What I mean by that is what they represent. I don't even think they represent Islam, let alone being Sunni. What their personal devotion and aqidah is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, this rhetoric is the same as the rhetoric you will find in any major culture of abuse. Let me give you a pop culture example. Everybody knows about the Diddy case, Puff Daddy Sean Combs. When the witnesses now are coming forward in documentaries and otherwise, and they're asked, why didn't you speak out earlier? These are largely black African American men and women. They all say the alarmingly same stupid response: we didn't want to bring the culture down. Diddy was someone who was from the ghetto, a black man from a broken home. He became rich, he made it out. We didn't want to bring the culture down, so we allowed abuse to continue over decades. Think about that, them saying that now, and some of the things that I've mentioned previously. Again, it's got nothing to do with religion or bringing deen or sunniyat or any of these things into disrepute. But just to put those people at ease a bit, and just to illustrate the point as well to Wahhabis and people who call themselves Salafis, that it's not always Sufis or Barelvis or people who have that ilk. So this is a famous case that happened a number of years ago. This is from a 5 Pillars, the news outlet account, about 2 Rakis, a husband and wife couple, Hasanat and Abdullah. They were not Sunni, they were Salafi. Social media stars Hasanat and Abdullah put £200,000 of charity into personal accounts. The Charity Commission has said social media stars Hasanat and Abdullah put around 200k of charity money into their personal bank accounts. An inquiry is highly critical of the pair, real names Hasanat and Rukhsana Ali, who raised money for Rohingya refugees but could not show how all funds were used. The Commission has redistributed approximately £196,000 of the money Hasanat and Ali raised, and both have been removed as trustees from the fund and disqualified. The pair, who had millions of social media followers, first attracted controversy last year when a number of allegations were leveled against them, including the misappropriation of money. Part of the allegations most concerning for the Muslim community were that this couple were shown in videos, they were out clubbing, they weren't practicing, they were mocking people when alleging to do ruqya, they were making thousands of pounds out of this industry. Shortly afterwards, Abdullah, Rukhsana Ali issued a statement accusing her husband Hasanat of physical and mental abuse, as well as being the sole reason for her living a double life. The last case that I'm going to mention, and then we'll move on to the second segment of this workshop. This individual is a Wahhabi, not a Pir, not a Sheikh in the spiritual Sufi sense. He was associated with one of the biggest Wahhabi institutes internationally. Wissam Sharif is his name. And let me say something before I read this account. Sometimes people say about us, you don't smile enough, you're not open enough, you don't have this flowery attitude about you. If you check this evil man, truly evil man, he always had a stupid, contorted smile on his face. He always has this flowery, gay nature about him, gay in the old English sense of the word. But look how evil a man he turned out to be in the end. 2 individuals sentenced to 70 and 80 years in conspiracy to sexually exploit a child. Birmingham, Alabama, 2 individuals have been sentenced for their roles in a conspiracy to sexually exploit a child, announced U.S. Attorney F. Escalona. On Thursday, United States District Judge Anna M. Manasco sentenced Wissam Sharif, 44, of Euless, Texas, to 960 months in prison, followed by a life term of supervised release. Sharif was also ordered to pay $135,000 special assessment under the Amy, Vicky and Andy Act, AVA. In June 2025, Sharif pleaded guilty to conspiracy to engage in sexual exploitation of children, conspiracy to receive and distribute child pornography, and sexual exploitation of children. In October 25, Sharif's co-defendant Blake Miller Barakat, also known as Hamna, 50 of Shelby County, Alabama, was sentenced to 840 months in prison, followed by a life term of supervised release. Barakat was also ordered to pay a £30,000 AVA special assessment. In June 25, Barakat pleaded guilty to sexual exploitation of children, distribution of child pornography, and possession of child pornography. Using the title of Imam, Sharif was an online instructor who specialized in Quran recitation and professed to have taught over 25,000 students worldwide. Barakat was one of Sharif's online students. According to court documents, Sharif told Barakat that a person, astaghfirullah, forgive me for this, could improve their recitation and become closer to God through achieving sexual pleasure. In October 24, Sharif and Barakat repeatedly watched and shared adult pornography videos with each other online, and then influenced a 7-year-old child to watch these videos. Both defendants further coerced this child to engage in sexually explicit conduct for the purpose of producing child pornography. So now I apologize again for a third, fourth, fifth time for having to read out all of these accounts. But it was just to stress the point that this is the reality of what's occurring and what will be happening to a countless number of people who are suffering in silence, thinking that these things are religiously sanctioned and that the community of Muslims will not support them. Now, another point to mention is that though I don't think there's any question that this problem in today's day and age at least affects invariably the South Asian community and what we would call globally the Sufi community, and in South Asia the Barelvi community more. But it's not localized just to that region or to that group. So for example, when I go on to talk about Tawiz and all these other khurafat, these are books which are available in Egypt, old books, commonly available books in Egypt. This has the same khurafat that you will find in the subcontinent, Tawiz and Hisab and all of these things. This is an Egyptian book, meaning it's not a subcontinent problem. Another book in English which is published in New Delhi, this is a Deobandi publishing house. It's a compilation of a number of books, one of which is even by Ashraf Ali Tahanawi. And even in this book, they have the same khurafat. So some of the same things that we're going to go through of ta'weed and things like this. So it's a problem that affects multiple communities, multiple ethnicities, different sects. I'm sure the Shia have this problem also. But again, we need to be honest that it invariably affects the Sufi community more than it does others. Now, when I was reading the accounts, one of the things I mentioned is one of the professors in one of the cases said that Orthodox Islam does not recognize black magic, and I said that's incorrect. So what I want to do before I get on to introducing exactly what I'm going through for the purposes of the workshop, I want to give a kind of disclaimer on what is the view of Islam and Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah on things like sihr, magic, jinn possession, and nadhar ayn. For two reasons. One is to preempt that people listening to this, our detractors are likely to say, see, they're mentioning these things, they're telling people magic is not real, or jinn possession is not real, which is not our position. Equally, there will be so many people, uneducated Muslims, who when they read the kind of accounts that I've gone through, will not believe in these things, assuming that these are things only associated with that which is false. They may innocently deny certain things. But what could start as an innocent denial can lead to, for example, if someone denies the existence of jinn, which is kufr, because jinn are mentioned in Quran. Worse still is that many people who think that that's the standard of what Islam practices with these things will end up leaving al-Islam, al-iyadhu billah. Another thing I forgot to mention, which I've just remembered, these things have generational successive impacts as well. In the first case of the woman that was tortured and then eventually died, many years later her husband was so fraught with grief and the fact that he allowed that to happen, he sent his daughter to these healers, he committed suicide. So it's bigger than even being localized to the time in which it happens in isolated cases. But coming on to what is the position of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah and sihr. Al-Imam al-Maziri rahimahullah and Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah cites this in his commentary on Sahih Muslim. He says, مذهب أهل السنة وجمهور علماء الأمة على إثبات السحر وأن له حقيقة كحقيقة غيره من الأشياء الثابتة. That the school of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah and the majority of the scholars of this ummah affirm the existence of sihr, affirm the existence of magic, and that it has a reality like all of the things which we affirm and know to be established and exist in creation. That sihr is real. خلافا لمن أنكر ذلك ونفى حقيقته وأضاف ما يقع منه إلى خيالات باطلة لا حقائق لها. And this is in stark contrast to those who negate the reality of magic and they say that it's simply a conjecture of the mind. وقد ذكره الله تعالى في كتابه. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned it clearly in Al-Quran Al-Kareem, meaning in the story of Harut and Marut and others. وذكر أنه مما يتعلم. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that it's something which is learned, meaning people learn magic. وذكر ما فيه إشارة إلى أنه مما يكفر به. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentioned that this is something whereby one can leave the fold of Islam if he practices it. وأنه يفرق بين المرء وزوجه. And that magic separates a husband from his wife. وهذا كله لا يمكن فيما لا حقيقة له. This couldn't be possible for something that doesn't have an actual reality. Meaning when it's able to have such an impact that it produces real world effects, like splitting families and couples and husband and wife apart, it has to be something that has a real reality. وهذا الحديث أيضا مصرح بإثباته وأنه أشياء دفنت وأخرجت. And this hadith, Imam al-Mazri is commenting on the hadith, also explicitly demonstrates that it's a reality and that magic comprises of doing certain things where you bury things and you extract things. وهذا كله يبطل ما قالوه فإهالة قومه من الحقائق محال. All of this invalidates what they claim, and this was the Mu'tazila who denied sihr, that sihr is only conjecture of the mind, not a reality. So we don't deny sihr, we don't deny black magic, we don't deny that people do magic on one another and that magic can be done. With regards jinn, of course, we believe in the existence of jinn as a reality, as they mentioned in Al-Quran Al-Kareem and in the Hadith. We're not like the reformists like Muhammad Abdu and Jamaluddin Al-Afghani and others from Egypt who said things like jinn, and I believe some of them even angels, were concepts, like certain metaphysical concepts, and they were terms to refer to those concepts. We don't believe that. We believe they are real beings created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The jinn from fire, the malaika from light. With regards possession, Al-Imam Al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anh, the Imam of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, he says in his maqalat, stating the position of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, إن الجنية يدخل في بدن المسروع. Jinns do enter into the body of somebody who is possessed. Meaning jinn possession is a reality. كما قال سبحانه وتعالى أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس. Then he cites a verse of the Quran which the ulama used as dalil that it's a reality. Again from the Salaf, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, his son Abdullah said to him, إن أقواما يزعمون أن الجنية لا يدخل في بدن الإنس. That there are people who are claiming that a jinn does not enter into the body of human beings. فقال يا بني يكذبون هو ذا يتكلم على لسانه. He said, oh my son, these people are lying. That it's a jinn itself speaking on their tongues. Meaning he was just making a point that the jinns are making them say this. Additionally, when it comes to nadhar, what we call nadhar, ayn, it's in a sahih hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-aynu haqq. The ayn is real. It's a reality. So let nobody say after they hear what we have to say that we're denying any of these things. We're not denying any of these things. However, what we're saying is, when we look at what this culture thrives on and what it weaponizes to exploit people, it has three primary control mechanisms. These control mechanisms are taken from universal truths like sihr, jinn possession, the things we've spoken about, and they add so many accoutrements to it, so many myths and so many fables. They make their own universal truths that now you're obliged to believe in without questioning. And as an uneducated and lay Muslim, you're inclined to believing in it because you know that there is a haqiqah to magic and jinn possession and these things. So we believe in all these things, but what we don't believe is that every turn and corner a jinn's about to pounce on you. or that every time you get ill, your auntie has done sihr on you, or that you had an argument with your wife and your in-laws are doing sihr on you. This is how these people exploit people to believe and place them in a constant position of anxiety. So this now brings me, or speaking about this one specifically, or rather this brings me to what we're going to talk about today. So the three things that were advertised on the poster for this workshop were what? Exposing Tawiz, grave culture, and Pir culture. Why did I pick these three things specifically? These three things are the trivium that make up weaponized control mechanisms to keep people controlled on different layers. So the first, Tawiz. Tawiz is given in response to what? A belief that I have a jinn, I have a this, I have a that. Even without having a Pir, without being involved in grave culture, without having a darbar that you go to, that culture has become so dominant that it keeps people under a certain degree of anxiety and stress throughout their lives. So now me, if I were a Pir, or the Pir who's created this culture, he doesn't even have to meet you to know that he has psychological control of you before you've even met him. And what's interesting about this is, it's funny, I'll give you an anecdote. I have a friend, a very good friend of mine. Him and his entire family were murid of a particular Pir. Alhamdulillah, they've left since. A very large family. Some of the children in this family were born into the tariqah, meaning they were born after the family had given bay'ah to this Pir. It seemed like every single child that was born was automatically by default assigned some spiritual problem or some jinn. So you would see the young boys in this family wearing 50 tawiz around their neck from birth. It was so bad that a member of the family passed away in an accident. An unfortunate accident, one member of the family passed away. The Pir immediately said to the family, so-and-so did tawiz, that's why the accident happened. This mechanism of control is not specific to Pir culture. Again, to take it out of that culture and to show you how this is about manipulation by very evil people. I mentioned Scientology before, and I said I'll be mentioning it throughout this talk. There's, amongst the really good books written on Scientology, one is Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood and the Prison of Belief by Lawrence Wright. And there's an accompanying documentary also as well. Why this book's so good is because it was a series of interviews with members who left the Church of Scientology, often very senior members, like the individual I mentioned at the beginning, Mike Rinder. In Scientology, you have what's called OT levels. Pay attention, follow me with this. You have OT levels. So you join the cult, you go through these OT levels, you have to pay to go up the level, you have to pay for books and resource and material to go up these levels. As you go up the levels, you're exposed to new truths that you didn't know before that are going to explain your purpose in this world. Once you reach the senior OT levels, I think it's $250,000 to reach this level. You're called in. You're taken into a room with security. You have to pass, I think, 2 or 3 security checks. You're given a briefcase with cuffs. You can't let that briefcase out of your sight. You're told now, open the briefcase, and that's the answer. Now you'll understand what life and everything is about. So a person opens a briefcase, there are a few sheets in there of something that L. Ron Hubbard wrote. Remember, L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the church or the cult, wrote the most science fiction in history. He was just a man who had a lot of free time and wrote a lot of gibberish. And then he made a religion out of it. The great story behind creation was that in the universe had a guardian, this big alien called Xenu. Xenu one day looked at the universe and thought, it's too overpopulated. So he froze all of the people who lived in the universe, sent planes to collect them, flew them into planet Earth, and dropped them into volcanoes. When he dropped them into volcanoes, their spirits, if you will, came out called Thetans. The Thetans were then put in a cinema for 4,000 years. In the cinema, they were played movies of all the bad that's going to happen in this world. Wars, murder, everything. The Thetans then, because they felt lonely, whenever a human being was born, would go and occupy the body of that human being. In fact, when there were no human beings left, every time a baby was born, it would automatically occupy the body of the baby. In the documentary Going Clear, one of the ex-Scientologists says, some obviously were shocked to realize that that was the case. Leah Remini, the famous actress, actually left Scientology after finding out this rubbish. She'd been in there since she was a child, practically born into the cult. Others, he said, this idea that your body is made up of thetans, that your thumb is a thetan and your nose is a thetan and your body is made up of thetans, were so crippled with anxiety that these things are occupying our body and that we have to rid them, and that all the bad we do is because the thetans are in our body. They either had one of two choices, short of obviously leaving the cult. Break down, have an actual mental breakdown, or this would give them more incentive to keep going up the OT levels. Maybe the next level adds clarity to this and it makes a bit more sense and I'll feel a bit more at ease. But again, look at the kind of way that they're controlling these people. These things are occupying your body. Until you don't get them out, you can't live this, because I think he claimed that OT 1111, your thetan will become so strong you can transport yourself to other parts of the world and do ridiculous things like this. So they would keep in the cult, even though they're now under so much immense pressure and anxiety with this belief that these things are occupying their body. They think the next level is going to explain things further, and that's going to give us a bit of relief. And this is what explains sometimes when you wonder why people remain in false Sufi tariqas and they don't leave, and despite the rubbish that they see, it's for this reason. You can be programmed to such a degree that you think the successive or the subsequent thing will make sense of the present thing. And what's interesting is a book I read very recently, in fact, about gambling, Addiction by Design, Machine Gambling in Las Vegas by Natasha D. Schultz. Very good book. That book is all about slot machines. So slot machines in Vegas traditionally were placed in the lobbies to occupy the wives of gamblers whilst they went and gambled. Now the slot machines actually bring in the most revenue for casinos. The two things that she mentioned that resonated with me about cults and about these groups. One is that these gamblers, when they gamble, studies show they actually become wiser to the fact that they're not going to win. But their inhibitions become weaker. They know they're not going to win, but they still have a glimmer of hope that they couldn't win, but their inhibitions are now weaker, as opposed to when they began knowing that they can stop at any second, but they don't choose to, so it becomes more difficult. And that's the same with people in these groups. I know it's stupid, I know it's false, but I can't leave now. I'm too deep into it. Maybe there's something at the end. What these people will then do is, where they are in their life, they'll add concentric layers of validation around it, where one layer only has to validate and explain the previous one. So if I can give a rough analogy, but it does the job. Imagine you have a fruit. The purpose of a fruit is what? If it has layers. You peel it, you get to the core, you eat it. That's the best part of the fruit. What if I said to you now that I'm going to give you a fruit, you start at the core, the best bit, you have to keep adding layers outside it. So when you have these false Sufi tariqas, most people, like lay, innocent people, will join. Because why? They're telling you to pray salah, they're telling you to read awrad, they're telling you what seems to be outwardly nice and good things. So far as Islam is concerned, you've started at the best you could start, which is what? Pray your salah, do your awrad, be good to people, and all of these things. But now you're slowly moving away from that. You're orbiting away from that nucleus. So what people in cults and groups and these fake tariqas will do, they have to add a new layer on that concentric circle to validate the previous one. So that's why we know of stories, people have joined tariqas, in a few years' time they're getting involved in all sorts of weird, debaucherous acts. Astaghfirullah, homosexuality, we've heard of men and men, women and women. How do people end up at that point? Because they don't even have a retrospective view of where they began. They only need to look at today and yesterday, and that's it. If today can make some vague sense of yesterday, then they feel comfortable, and then they just stay in that rat trap. So that's the first layer of control. You don't have to pin it to a person, you don't have to pin it to a place. If I can make you believe as a community that these things are going to attack you at every instance, and every time you get ill it's that, I already control you. I don't need you to meet me. But now it makes it easier for me to now progress to the second, which is graves. So with graves now, I tell you about certain rites and rituals to do at graves, at darbars, at shrines. It's nothing which has been mentioned in Islam, but I can convince you enough that it's something which is specific to us. It's something we know others don't know. But it's about now moving from exploiting your psyche to translating that into tangible, real things in the real world that you do. Go to a darbar and do whatever at a darbar or a shrine. So that's the second level, where I now have to pin you to something tangible in this world, graves. The third level is now where the enablers are the Pirs. So I get you in the rights, I get you in the mind frame. Now all I need to do is convince you that I'm the one who solves all the problems. And that's not hard to do when you've gone through that gradation of the first two steps. And think about most people who end up with the worst kind of Pirs. I mean, they're all pretty much the same, but the worst of the worst. They're ill people, they're mentally ill people, people who are physically ill, people who've had bereavements, all the things like this that get exploited by these people. What's really interesting is that when you look at these three things, these three layers that I'm talking about, it very closely aligns and mimics the three elements that comprise and make up cults. So when writers write about cults and they say what makes a cult distinct from a religion, it's three things. The first is a charismatic leader, but really in this day and age, any leader that eventually becomes the objective of worship of his followers. That can be male or female. You have that in the Pir figures. The second, you reprogram the rhetoric and dictum of the people, i.e. you brainwash them. So you teach them all the terms that we're going to go through, terms that don't have any meaning, but with that you make them believe that they have something other people don't know, regardless of whether they can explain that to others or not. This is how they should think, this is what they should say, this is what they should speak. The last element is having a extremely liberal or extremely conservative attitude towards sex and sexuality. Because that's the biggest driving force of as we're considered as humans. So if you can control that in either way of the two, you can control a person very easily. So these are the three things that I want to cover today in detail. What's wrong with the Tawiz culture, the grave culture, and the Pir culture in that order. Now, that same group I spoke about at the beginning would say, then what's the point of you doing this? What's the objective then? What do you want to get out of today? First thing, let me make something abundantly clear. My objective, our objective, the Sheikh's objective is not to make anybody leave a Pir or leave a cult. The honest truth is we couldn't care less. What I mean by that is some people are so generationally affixed to believing in that, there's no point investing time to convince people to leave. Think about the biggest frauds that come to this country, like the mic blower. It takes a very special kind of idiot to become his murid. It doesn't matter how long I speak for, that guy is never going to leave him. In fact, I'll give you an anecdote I just remembered. A number of years ago I went for Umrah, and I try to go every Ramadan. And usually I'll go alone or with family or friends. So alhamdulillah, I have some very good friends who take groups. So when I told them I'm going, and I usually go with them as friends, they said, we have a group going on this date anyway, rather than you booking separate dates, come with us, you can fly in and fly out. The only thing will be you'll fly in with the group and fly out with the group, we'll just be together as friends in the room. I said, okay. We get to the hotel, or in fact before we got to the hotel in Al-Makkah al-Mukarramah, we stop off, it was a stop off flight. One of the individuals is wearing his ihram and he's walking barefoot in the airport. So I asked him, why are you walking barefoot? He said, oh, my family forgot to pack my slippers in my hand luggage. They accidentally put it in my cargo luggage. Even at that time, for some reason I thought, I bet this guy's been coming for Umrah and wearing trainers or the wrong shoes. For some reason I feel like he's seen people not wearing that, and to hide the embarrassment that he didn't know, he's just walking barefoot. Eventually somebody had a spare pair of slippers and they gave it to him. We get to the hotel in Al-Makkah al-Mukarramah. My friend says, let's wait, let everybody go to their rooms, make sure everybody's in their rooms, and then we'll go to our rooms. There were 3 of us at the time. I said, no problem. I'm going into the room, this man's coming out with somebody else to go and do Umrah. His ihram is brown. So I asked him, what happened to your ihram? He said, oh, I spilled tea on it. So I went in the bathroom, I ran water in the bathtub and I threw it there and it spread on the ihram. So I said to him, brother, look, there's literally a shop right outside the hotel. It'll cost you £2 or £3 perhaps, maybe 5. Buy a new ihram, don't go and do Umrah on this ihram. So first he came back with his jahil fit, it's not permissible to change your ihram. He didn't know I was a mulvi. I said, look, it's permissible, there's nothing wrong with it. Change your ihram and then go and do Umrah. They said, okay. Coincidentally, we hadn't left yet. We ended up spending so long in the hotel. By the time we left to do Umrah, he was coming back in a brown ihram. And the person with him said he was unwilling to pay a few pounds to buy a new ihram. When we were leaving Al-Madinatul Munawwara, I was slightly behind him on the opposite side of the aisle in the plane, and he was slightly ahead. Behind him were a brother and sister Somalians. There's a reason I mentioned that detail. The brother, mashallah, tall gentleman, 6'7", 6'8", massive guy. He was ill. So long legs. The sister tapped on that man's seat and said, uncle, if you don't mind, my brother's unwell. He just needs to stretch a bit to make him feel better. This man had a fit, saying the things you would expect a jahid to say, I paid for this ticket, it's my right. And she asked very politely. Why I mentioned the detail of they were Somalian? Because it seemed like a bit of latent racism towards him also. So I thought I would never see this man again, I'd be glad to never see him again. A while later, actually in last December at Bingley Hall, I saw this idiot at Bingley Hall, and he's a murid of the big idiot. The saddest thing was, he was wearing an imama and dressed his best. And I thought when he was a guest of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he only was required to wear 2 pieces of white garment, he couldn't do it for Allah, and he dressed his best for his Pir. How am I going to convince these people to leave? Why would I want to convince these people to leave? So the objective is not those people of that crowd. So who is the audience that we're speaking to? The audience that we're speaking to, a decade younger than me, in their 20s and younger, don't feel like they have to deal with the same challenge or pressure that we did growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. And for those older than me, even earlier than that, which was what? An ultimatum. If you want to practice the deen, or alleged to be practicing the deen, you become Wahhabi or Salafi, or you become Bay'ah with the Pir. That the only option you have to retain a Sunni identity is to be Bay'ah with the Pir. That's how they got most of their people in generationally. Families was like that. They made it out as if they're stalwarts and defenders of Sunni Aqidah, and that these hallmarks, Tawiz and all these things are what makes you a Sunni, will keep you a Sunni. We want to show the young generation coming up that there is mainstream Sunni Islam based on the 4 madhahib, the Sunni madhahib, and that's what your Islam is. That's what your Sunniyat, when you say Sunniyat, that's what your Sunniyat is. You don't have to gravitate to one or 2 of these groups. Alhamdulillah, we have now in recent years with us, our students, the other teachers here and others, shown what following the Quran and Sunnah means for a Sunni, for Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So it's to protect people to falling in the clutches of these groups. Another objective, and arguably equally as important, if not more important than the second one, is that to give victims of the abuse of these Pirs a voice. We can't speak out and for every single one of them, but we can show them that A, this is not Islam, and that there are some people within the religious class, even if it's only 2, who understand their struggle. You can't sympathize, we don't know what they went through. Meaning you can't relate to someone who goes through something that horrific. But we can certainly say that we'll condemn the people who did it, as Maulvis, as ulama, as whatever you'd like to call us. Remember, who knows how many people have committed ridda and left Islam because of the actions of these people. Like I said, it's like an orbit. It doesn't just affect the victim. That poor girl's father committed suicide years later. He left a family behind. He left children behind. He left relatives behind. You think it wouldn't occur to somebody who's been made to believe that these are the people who are protecting your iman, that is this all even true, going beyond even the things that they were exploited with? So if after today we can just do those 2 things, make young people know that's not Sunni Islam, that's not Islam of any kind, and that you can follow Quran and Sunnah, be a Sunni, be from Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, without having to become a Wahhabi, or without having to become one of these people. Now, this was advertised as a workshop, so I'd request everyone to just bear with us. There's a lot to get through. It'll be maybe slightly different to my manner of delivering from those of you who know me, but I guarantee you, it's going to be worth it. And it's a shame that this hasn't been done before. So I'm going to start with Tawiz, what we call Tawiz, because I said it's a gradation.
So Tawiz, in my estimation, is the broadest of things that we can address. Now with any discussion, the first thing we have to look at is first definitions. What even is Tawiz? Is it even a word in Arabic? Is it even a thing? Does it have any meaning? Or is it just something in the subcontinent? Is it something from Farsi? What is a Tawiz? So I have in front of me Al-Mawsu'atul Fiqhiyya Al-Kuwaitiyya. This is a modern fiqh encyclopedia, Sunni fiqh encyclopedia, which was compiled by Sunni ulama in Kuwait under the leadership and supervision of Shaykh Mustafa Az-Zarqa rahimahullah ta'ala. So it's an encyclopedia like you would expect an encyclopedia to be, of fiqh in alphabetical order, and they have an entry, Tawiz. So now let's actually define what these things are. And these are definitions within the framework of Islam and fiqh. And I'm going to cite the most relevant passages because again there's a lot. The most relevant passages or the passages that illustrate our point. But I tell you what I'm reading from, anybody's free to go and check it. So والتعويذ في الاصطلاح يشمل الرقى والتمائم ونحوها مما هو مشروع أو غير مشروع. So ta'weed is a word in Arabic. It's an umbrella term, and it simply is an umbrella term inclusive of things like ruqyas, tama'im, tamima is what you wear around your neck, and anything of that kind, regardless of whether it's something legislated within Islam or not legislated within Islam. It's just a broad umbrella term. So that already smashes that smoke and mirrors that Tawiz intrinsically is something holy or sacred. Ta'weed in Arabic simply means an umbrella term that's used to connote and refer to any kind of ruqya, good or bad, any kind of thing you wear, good or bad. That's all a ta'weed is. So now under ta'weed, what other terms do we have to look at and define? The first is ruqya. So some of the fuqaha define ruqya as بأنها ما يرقى به من الدعاء لطلب الشفاء. It's a dua that is recited so that you seek shifa from it. This is what ruqya is. فالرقية أخص من التعويذ لأن التعويذ يشمل الرقية وغيرها فكل رقية تعويذ ولا عكس. So the term ruqya is more specific than ta'weed, because ta'weed is inclusive, like we said, of ruqya and other things. So every ruqya is ta'weed, not every ta'weed is ruqya. So this is the first thing, ruqya. So this is what you recite, what you read to seek shifa, ruqya. The second thing now is tamima. Broadly the ulama said tamima is ما علك في الأعناق من القلائد خشية العين أو غيرها. It's what would be worn around the necks of people out of fear of nazar, ayn, or anything else. وفي الحديث من تعلق تميمة فلا أتم الله له. It's mentioned in the hadith, whoever ties a tamima, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not complete his good health or his recovery or his well-being. So this was the tamima of the jahiliyyah. So when we say ta'weed, ta'weed broad term. Ruqya, what you read, tamima, what you wear around your neck. But that's a broad definition according to ulama, ahlul ilm. According to the fuqaha more specifically, tamima is العوذة التي تعلق على المريض والصبيان وقد يقول فيها القرآن وذكر الله إذا خرز عليها جلد. According to the fuqaha specifically, ta'weed is what you wear around your neck or you place it around the neck of somebody who's ill or a child, and it can have at times Quran in it and the dhikr of Allah, and it's typically wrapped in some kind of leather or covering. So this is tamima. So the fuqaha say tamima can be with Quran and with the dhikr of Allah, and it's something you wear around your neck. So ta'weed, ruqya, tamima. Then you have al-wada'a. Al-wada'a in English is cypraea. Cypraea is a mollusk which has a white shell, very small white shell. It's شيء أبيض يجلب من البحر يعلق في أعناق الصبيان وغيرهم. They say it's a cypraea, a white shell that's taken out of the ocean and would be tied around the necks of children in the time of Jahiliyyah. And again, there's a hadith that says, "Man 'allaka wada'atan fala wada'a Allahu lahu." Whoever ties a wada'a around their neck, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not put blessings in their well-being. وإنما نهي عنها لأنهم كانوا يعلقونها مخافة العين. Why this was prohibited is because the Jahili Arabs would tie this around their neck, that shell, out of fear of ayn, meaning they believe that itself could repel nazar and ayn. So ta'weez, ruqya, tamima, wada'a. The fifth thing is tuwala, and some ulama do dabt of it as tiwala. That, according to the ulama, is tahbibul mar'ati ila zawjiha. It's anything that a person makes of these kind of things to make a wife become beloved to her husband. So a husband and wife are having issues, and tiwala is what the people would have made to engender love between them. So ta'weed, ruqya, tamima, tiwala, wada'a. Then you have tuf, nafh and nafkh. These are 3 degrees of how you blow when doing any one of these deeds. So one is with a bit of spittle, like that. And one is just blowing. Then you have a nashra. Nashra is هي أن يكتب شيئا من أسماء الله تعالى أو من القرآن ثم يغسله بالماء ثم يمسح به المريض أو يسقيه. Nashra is when somebody writes something from the Quran, meaning ayat of the Quran, or the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he washes it in water, then he wipes over somebody who's sick, or he gives it to him to drink. Or alternatively, it's when you write some Quran in a bowl, and you give it, for example, to a pregnant woman at the time of birth to ease her pregnancy, her delivery. Or you give it to a sick person. That's nashra. So ta'weed, ruqya, tamima, wada'a, nashra, tiwala or tuwala. Then you have lastly ratima. Ratima in this context is what the Jahili Arabs would do in wearing a thread around their wrist or around their neck. They would tie a thread around their wrist or around their neck. So these are all of the components so far as an Islamic fiqh framework is concerned. And we're not talking about at this point permissible or non-permissible. Just what fiqh has recognized from the corpus of al-Islam: ta'weed, ruqya, tamima, wada'a, nashra, ratima, and tiwala, wa tuwala. 7 things. And then the blowing, types of blowing. So now, what is the broad hukm relating to these things? If we're only talking about these things, you can categorize all of these things into 1 of 2 categories. Or rather, you can categorize or split the discussion into 1 of 2 parts or to 2 parts. The first is when we're talking about things مَا لَا يُعْقَلُ مَعْنَاهُ, anything where its meaning is not comprehensible or intelligible. So whether someone's doing a ruqya, whether they're writing something, whether they're reading something, whatever the thing is, if it's not intelligible, you don't understand what it says, you don't know what it means, you don't know what they're doing, that's the first category. وَمِنْهُ مَا كَانَ يُلْقَى بِهِ فِي الجَّاهِلِيَّةِ. So amongst that are the things which people used to use in the Jahiliyyah. But this would refer to anything that people use for these ends, spiritual ends, outside of al-Islam. Any kind of Jahiliyyah, whether it's from Hindu tradition, wherever it may be. ذهب جمهور الفقهاء إلى أنه يجب اجتنابه بلا خلاف. The majority of fuqaha have said it's wajib to remain away from these things, and there's no dispute about that. So keep this in mind now. I'm giving you from the outset the guardrails that will protect you, if you just know this, from falling into getting any fake, evil or bad ta'weez. First thing, if you don't understand it, you can't read what it says. It's scribbled, it's language you don't understand, it's words you don't understand, it's a practice you don't understand. If it's something that's not from the tradition of Islam, the fuqaha say it's wajib, you leave it, you abandon it. You don't do anything with it. You don't go near it. They say this applies to anything of this kind, whether it's a tamima, something you put around your neck, whether it's a kharaza, so sometimes in the Jahili Arabs would get pearls, they wear those around their neck. And they would believe that these things repel evil, these things repel bad, intrinsically. All of these things you stay away from. يجب اجتنابه. You stay away from these things. They continue to say وكذلك الرقى والتعاويذ محمولة أيضا على ذلك أو على ما إذا كانت بغير لسان العرب ولا يدرى ما هي. Similarly, any ta'weed, anything you're going to wear, anything anybody's going to give you, it has the same hukm. Particularly so if it's not in Arabic. What do I mean when it's not in Arabic? I don't mean the writing is not in Arabic, meaning it's a non-Arabic word. So if you wrote the word John or James, but you wrote it in Arabic letters, it doesn't make it Arabic all of a sudden. So if it's not something which is Arabic, comprehensible, intelligible, it's impermissible to use it. Why? Because it may have sihr in it, magic, it could be magic. Worse still, it could be kufr. فَإِنَّهَا هِينَئِذٍ حَرَامٌ. In that case, then this is all haram. This was the fatwa of Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. When he was asked about this, he said, what do you know? Perhaps it's kufr. Meaning, how would you determine it's not kufr? So this is with relation to ruqya and ta'weed of that kind. We don't know its meaning. We don't know what it is. If we can't work out what it is, we won't say what it is, but we just leave it. We won't guess what it is, we just leave it entirely. It's haram. As for ruqya, which is blowing when reciting Quran, meaning ruqya shar'iyya, blowing by reciting Quran, Al-Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah says, وَقَدْ أَجْمَعُوا عَلَى جَوَازِهِ وَاسْتَحَبَّهُ الْجُمْهُورُ مِنَ الصُّحَابَةِ وَالتَّابِعِينَ وَمَنْ بَعْدَهُمْ. Al-Imam Nawawi rahimahullah says there is an ijma', a consensus that it's permissible. And it was deemed to be mustahab by the majority of the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, and those who came after them. So now you have two very clear guardrails. Stay away from what? Anything you don't understand. Whether that's a practice, whether that's a paper, whether that's a prescription, you stay away from it. What can you do? Recite Quran, dhikrullah, and blow on a person. There's ijma' that that's permissible. As for the ratima now, the ratima, remember we said, was what is worn around the neck, a thread, or the wrist. And you'd see this commonly, Pirs give this to their murids to wear. Remember, even outside of this discussion, there are sha'airul Islam. There are certain things which are the hallmark of Islam. So like for a man, the beard, not shaving the beard entirely and keeping a big mustache, for women, hijab, etc. These are sha'airul Islam. If you saw somebody from the subcontinent, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, wherever they're from, and they had and you didn't know the person, and they were wearing a thread around their wrist, who do you usually associate that with? Hindus and Sikhs. It's not something that Muslims do. But yet you'll see people in these fake tariqas, they wear threads, red threads around their wrist, around their ankle, around their neck. So the hukm on this is فَهُوَ مَنْهِيٌ أَنْهُ لِأَنَّهُ مِنْ جِنْسِ الْتَمَائِمِ الْمُحَرَّمَةِ. This is also prohibited, because it's from the same genus of those things which are deemed haram. Meaning this is something which the Jahili Arabs would do. So it's from that same jins, that same genus. It has no basis in Islam. So now you have three things. You know what to stay away from. You know what's permissible. And you know not to tie things to your wrist, to your neck, just threads. Just threads, this is we're talking about. This is all impermissible. So now if we were to lay out three conditions that would help you determine exactly what's permissible, the three conditions are, and in this particular book they attribute these to Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah. I personally didn't find it in any of the works of Imam al-Suyuti, but Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, he mentions this ijma' in Fathul Bari, and we're going to give a number of citations that shows that there's a consensus that this is the limiting three conditions on what's permissible. Number one, أن يكون بكلام الله وبأسمائه وصفاته. That it be with the names of Allah, the kalam of Allah, or the sifat of Allah. Inshallah, we'll continue after Maghrib Salah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So we concluded just before breaking for Salatul Maghrib, we gave the definitions of the terms that we said that we'd be speaking about today and that we need to recognize in order to have a fruitful discussion about Tawiz. We asked the question, is Tawiz even a thing, a concept, or is it something just from the subcontinent? Is it a word of Farisi? And we demonstrated how Tawiz is an umbrella term, and under the umbrella term you have Ruqya, Tamima, Ratima, Tiwala, Wada'a and Nashra. And I mentioned two guardrails, that if a person stays within these guardrails, you'll never become prey to taking or wearing a fake Tawiz, an evil Tawiz, a Tawiz that can have sihr or kufr in it. Now the conditions according to the ulama, which if they're fulfilled, it's permissible to wear this kind of Tawiz or to do this kind of ruqya, regardless of whether you recite it or whether you wear it. As I mentioned, this Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah mentions this ijma' in Fathul Bari. Furthermore, many of the ulama mention it, and I'll be giving more references as well. So there are three conditions the ulama stipulated in order for a tawiz, a ruqya, anything of that kind to be deemed permissible in Islam. The first, أن يكون بكلام الله أو بأسمائه وصفاته. It must be something which is with the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning the Quran, or the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first condition. The second condition, أن يكون باللسان العربي وبما يعرف معناه. The ta'weez, the ruqya, whatever it is, must be in Arabic, and its meaning must be comprehensible and intelligible. You can understand it. The third condition, أن يعتقد أن التعويذ والرقية لا تؤثر بذاتها بل بتقدير الله سبحانه وتعالى. That the individual wearing it or reciting or being recited upon believe that ta'weez, ruqya intrinsically have no effectuation, it's only by the taqdeer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are three simple conditions. This is the 5% of knowledge that will protect you from 100% of the fitna. If with ta'weez and spiritual healing and all of this, if you want to be protected from 100% of the fitna, make sure you don't fall out of the parameters of these three conditions. Has to be Arabic, has to be Quran, dua, dhikrullah. You have to understand what it's saying, and you believe that shifa, cure, aid is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The paper is not giving you the cure. The words or the man reading is not giving you the cure himself. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Placing this at the outset rather than placing this at the end is to demonstrate how plain and simple the framework for this is so far as a Muslim is concerned. This is literally all you need to know. If you leave after this, you don't listen to any more of this lecture or workshop, this is enough ilm to protect you from fake spiritual healers. More than enough to protect you. Now let's say somebody objects to the citation of Mawsu'a Fiqhiyya, which I said is a contemporary work. I want to give some references from traditional works of the madhahib. So because we are predominantly Hanafi, in the Hashiyah of Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah, this is in the 21st volume, page 416 of the Sheikh Furfur edition. Remember, the Hashiyah of Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah is the khulasa of the Hanafi madhab. The last most depended upon and reliable work and authority in the Hanafi madhab is the Hashiyah of Imam Ibn Abidin, no work after it. So when you want fatwa or you want to know the strongest position of the Hanafis, you read the Hashiyah. Al-Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah, citing another work, Al-Mughrib, in amongst that passage he says, the author of Al-Mughrib, قالوا وإنما تكره العوذة إذا كانت بغير لسان العرب ولا يدرى ما هو. Ta'weez, whether you recite something or you wear it, is not permissible. It's makruh tahrimi if it's not in Arabic or you don't understand what's being said. Again, I'll stress, not in Arabic doesn't mean the ta'weez is in English or Swahili or Farsi. No, it can be in Arabic script, but it must be an Arabic word. Like I said, if you write John or James in Arabic script, it doesn't make the word Arabic. You have to know what it means, what it says. It has to be clearly intelligible and comprehensible. وَلَعَلَّهُ يَدْخُلُهُ سِحْرٌ أَوْ كُفْرٌ أَوْ غَيْرُ ذَلِكَ. Because if it's not, how do you know there's no magic in it? How do you know it's not magic? Worse still, how do you know there's not kufr in it? So it must be Arabic, intelligible, and comprehensible. وَأَمَّا مَا كَانَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ أَوْ شَيْءٍ مِنَ الدَّعَوَاتِ فَلَا بَأْسَ بِهِ. Any ta'weez you wear or you recite, so long as it's Quran or something from the well-known du'as, the du'as from the Sunnah, the du'as of the Salaf, even the du'as of the Salihin, like the Ahzab and the Hizb of Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, for example, the Hizb of Imam al-Shadhili rahimahullah. These all accord to these conditions. There's nothing wrong with reciting these, no problem. He then cites al-Imam al-Zayla'i rahimahullah. Al-Imam al-Zayla'i rahimahullah, the famous commentator on Kanz al-Daqa'iq, he says about the ratima. Remember why I said the ratima is? The ratima is when you tie thread around your wrist, around your neck. This is what the Jahili Arabs would do. For us in the South Asian subcontinent, when you see someone from our part of the world wearing that, you'll assume, he's a Sikh or he's a Hindu. This is not from the hallmarks of Islam, even without knowing this. Regardless whether a Pir gave it or you got it from a darbar or whatever. He says, هي خيط كان يربط في العنق أو في اليد في الجاهلية. That it's a thread that people would wear on their neck or around their wrist in the Jahiliyyah. لدفع المضرة عن أنفسهم على زعمهم. Because they thought that this could repel difficulty. So they would wear a thread around their wrist, around their neck. Just a thread, we're not talking about ta'weed, just a thread. وهو منهي عنه. That this is strictly prohibited. وذكر في حدود الإيمان أنه كفر. And he says that the author of Hudud al-Iman, which was a book, though the muhakkik of this work said we couldn't find what this exact book is, but it's a book that Imam Zayl'i was citing. In there the author says أنه كفر. In fact, it's even kufr to wear this, with this belief. Then he goes to talk on about tamima. And remember, we said tamima, in this is خرزات كانت العرب تعلقها على أولادهم يتقون بها العين في زعمهم. It's the Arabs would take pearls and they would put it on their children, thinking that it will protect them against nazar, against ayn. So they would make necklaces with pearls with the intention that these pearls are going to protect them from ayn. فأبطلها الإسلام. Islam came and invalidated it. He cites the same hadith I cited previously about the one who wears a tamima, and then he says, why is there such a harsh punishment and warning against wearing a tamima in this specific context where I'm talking about the pearls, or like this where we mentioned previously? لأنهم يعتقدون أنها تمام الدواء والشفاء. Because when the Jahili Arabs would wear this, they would believe that this is the most perfect and complete cure, that this is the top tier of cure, there's nothing beyond this. بل جعلوها شركاء. In fact, they committed shirk by doing that and thinking that. Why? لأنهم أرادوا بها دفع المقادير المكتوبة عليهم. Because they thought that they can repel things which have been decreed for them, meaning the taqdeer of Allah, nothing can repel it. وطلبوا دفع الأذى من غير الله تعالى الذي هو دافعه. And they sought to repel evil and badness from other than Allah, who in reality is the only one who can repel all of these things. So it's very dangerous when people think wearing this, it's okay, wearing a thread around their neck. The ulama are telling us in instances, if not haram at the very least, it can even be shirk and kufr to wear this, depending on what the person thinks it's doing for them. Al-Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah goes on to cite Al-Mujtaba, another work in fiqh, in which the author says that there was some difference of opinion concerning seeking shifa with the Quran. For example, reciting Surah Al-Fatiha over somebody who's been stung. Or for example, again these are things we mentioned previously, writing it on a piece of paper and wearing it around your neck, or writing it in a bowl and washing it and giving it to a person to drink. In the end of the passage, the author says, وَعَلَى الْجَوَازِ عَمَلُ النَّاسِ الْيَوْمِ. That today, the practice of the ulama is that this is permissible. You can wear Quran as ta'weed around your neck. You can wear dua as ta'weed around your neck with the conditions I mentioned, on the condition that it's wrapped in leather or something else, meaning it's closed, it's wrapped. وَبِهِ وَرَدَتِ الْآثَارِ. And he says that there are many hadith, athar from the Sahaba, and athar and narrations from the Salaf that prove the permissibility of this. This was done by some of the Sahaba. ولا بأس بأن يشد الجنب والحائض التعاويذ على العضد إذا كانت ملفوفة. And that there's nothing wrong if somebody who's in a state of major ritual impurity, or a woman is on her monthly cycle, that she wear a ta'weed on a part of her body or wraps it around a limb, so long as it's wrapped up in something, that's permissible. So you can wear ta'weed, meaning of Quran or dua, so long as it's wrapped up in something tightly within our madhab, even if you're not in a state of purity, that's permissible. Al-Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah, he concludes this passage by citing Al-Imam Al-Tahtawi, who says, وانظر هل كتابة القرآن في نحو التمائم حروفا مقطعة تجوز أم لا لأنه غير ما وردت به كتابة القرآن وحرره. Imam Al-Tahtawi, when he concludes this discussion, he just says, okay, we know, we've given the conditions. It's permissible to wear ta'weed of the Quran. It's permissible to do ruqya with the Quran. However, with writing the Quran, he says we need to look into, is it permissible to write the Quran by separating the letters? For example, you write Qul huwallahu ahad, someone writes a ta'weed, they put qaf, lam, ha, waw. Is this permissible? He says this is something we need to look into, and this is something which we need to write upon, meaning come to a decision on. So that's also something which is something we should avoid. You may find a ta'weez which has Quran, but they've written the Quran by separating the words, separating the letters more specifically. So that just goes to show how scrupulous the ulama were, even with ta'weez which is permissible. That it's simple. You write the Quran, you write a dua, that's it. Nothing else. So this was, like I mentioned, the 5% of all I'm going to talk about, which will protect you from 100% of the fitna. If you stop listening after this, whether it's on video or whether you're here today, you'll never be beguiled, you'll never be defrauded by one of these spiritual healers. Not that you should go to them, but let's say you have a family member, etc. If they're giving them anything outside of what I mentioned, it's not permissible. At the very least, you'd say, stay away from it. At the very least. So this is, as I mentioned, all of the terms relating to the things that we're talking about when it comes to Tawiz, within the framework of the fiqh of al-Islam, and what the Muslim corpus spoke about, regardless, like I said, whether it was mashru' or ghayr mashru'. Now what I want to look into is, there are a number of sciences the ulama spoke about which were deemed categorically haram in the Hashiyah of Imam Ibn Abidin and other fiqh works. Why I want to speak about these is so when you listen, you can decide on whether you find any similarity between these sciences and what you know a Pir or Amil is doing. These are all sciences which are haram. The first one Al-Imam Ibn Abidin mentions, this is in the Muqaddimah of the Hashiyah. And he's obviously commenting on the Dur. So the author of the Dur mentions these and he's expanding on what these mean. At-Tanjim, astrology. But what's the exact definition of astrology? هو علم يعرف به الاستدلال بالتشكلات الفلكية على الحوادث السفلية. It's a knowledge whereby it's claimed that by looking at the celestial orbit, constellations, etc., you can do istidlal, you can make some judgment, you can extrapolate something about something that's going to occur on the earth. This is astrology, tanjim. Imam Ibn Abidin then goes on to a discussion about stars in and of themselves and the study of stars. Is that permissible? Is there something other than astrology that's permissible? But he concludes the passage by citing in fact Hujjatul Islam al-Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah. Al-Imam al-Ghazali says, إن علم النجوم في نفسه غير مذموم لذاته. That the study of stars intrinsically in and of themselves is not something which is just praiseworthy, meaning they're a creation of Allah. If you were to just study stars as a creation of Allah, that's not madhmoom. إذ هو قسمان. He says because what resultant of this is that there are two sciences related to stars. What he's talking about is astronomy and astrology. But then he continues to say وَلَكِنَّهُ مَذْمُومٌ فِي الشَّرْعِ. But it is dispraiseworthy and condemnable in the Sharia. وَقَالَ عُمَرُ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. This is the fatwa of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu concerning how much you can study when it comes to stars. تَعَلَّمُوا مِنَ النُّجُومِ مَا تَحْتَدُونَ بِهِ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ ثُمَّ أَمْسِكُوا. Study enough relating to stars that will allow you to be guided, meaning in travel on land and in the sea, and then stop. That's all that's permissible. Enough that you use the science and you look at stars for your bearings geographically to orientate yourself. Everything after that, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh said, Amsiku. Leave it, don't go into it. That's a fatwa of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anh. Al-Imam Ghazali rahimahullah mentioned three reasons Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh said this. He said the first, أَنَّهُ مُضِرٌ بِأَكْثَرِ الْخَلْقِ. That this knowledge in reality is very harmful to most people. Why? Because even if you tell them that just by way of aada, hypothetically, that when this star is here or when this planet is in this motion, this thing seems to happen every time that happens, people aren't intelligent enough and don't have enough common sense to recognize that it's not intrinsically effectuated by the star itself. Meaning they'll say the star is doing this, which is shirk. The second reason, أن أحكام النجوم تخمين محض. That all of this is just pure estimation. It's not absolute, it's not قطعي. It's just estimation. The third, أنه لا فائدة فيه فإنما قدر كائن والاحتراز منه غير ممكن. The third is there's no benefit in it in reality. Everything which is decreed by Allah is going to happen. There's nothing you can do to change that. because astrologers allege to tell you what's going to happen in the future so you can avert it. He says the reality is everything which is muqaddar will happen. So there's nothing you can do to avert that. He then mentions another science, ilm al-raml. That is, هو علم بدروب أشكال من الخطوط والنقط بقواعد معلومة تخرج حروفا تجمع ويستخرج جملة دالة على عواقب الأمور وقد علمت أنه حرام قطعا. So this is a science where the practitioners of this science, or practitioners rather of this science, they draw out certain lines and certain dots. That's a science, and they have rules of how you draw the lines, how you draw the dots. They extract letters from it, they bring the letters together. From those letters they extract a sentence which they say tells them something about the future. And he says, you know that this is haram, without question. وفي فتاوى ابن حجر الإمام ابن حجر الهيثمي رحمه الله, in his فتاوى الحديثية, which we're going to reference heavily later, he says أن تعلمه وتعليمه حرام شديد التحريم لما فيه من إيهام العوام أن فاعله يشارك الله تعالى في غيبه. That this is haram, studying it and teaching it, it's severely haram, because the study and practice of this and exposure to the awam to this makes them think that people know the ghaib of Allah, where the ghaib is known only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's ilm al-ram. So you have tanjim, astrology, and ram. For this next bit, I want you to keep three things in mind. The 3 P's: practitioner, process, and product. So when you consider Pirs, when you go to Pirs for Tawiz or anything else, the practitioner is the Pir or the Amil. Why in our culture they say is an Amil. You have the process, which what do our people do, or these people do? They call Hisab, Kitab. You have the product, which is what? The Tawiz. So 3 P's: the practitioner, the process, and the product. I just want you to keep that process with relation to Amilin and Pirs in mind as I'm reading this passage. I'm not saying they're the same, I'm not saying one is taken from the other, but it's something to keep in mind. One of the ulum which is haram is kahana. Kahana is like soothsaying, fortune telling. But what's the actual definition of kahana? هي تعاطي الخبر عن الكائنات في المستقبل. It's to pursue reports from creation relating to the future, meaning think you can get news about what's going to happen in the future. وادعاء معرفة الأسرار, and claiming you have knowledge of certain secrets. قال في نهاية الحديث, he's now quoting النهاية في غريب الحديث والأثر of Imam Ibn al-Athir رحمه الله. This is important, pay attention. وقد كان في العرب كهنة كالشق والستيح, this is Satih al-Ghassani. فمنهم من كان يزعم أن له تابعا يلقي إليه الأخبار. So there is a group from these kahana, these fortune tellers, they would say, we have a tabi', we have this follower that tells us things. Keep this in mind, it's going to be very relevant for a later portion. We have a follower and it tells us things, it gives us news, gives us reports. That was one kind. ومنهم أنه يعرف الأمور بمقدمات يستدل بها على موافقها من كلام من يسأله أو حاله أو فعله وهذا يخصونه باسم العراف كالمدعي معرفة المسروق ونحوه. Another group of the kahana, they would claim that we can work out things by putting certain premises in a certain way, by asking you questions. We can learn about things about you, about what you do, about your personality. The ulama named this kind of kahin arraf. Now look at the example they give to demonstrate what an arraf does. By way of example, like a person who claims he can determine the whereabouts of something which was stolen from you. That became quite a big source of income for a lot of Pirs a few years ago, that someone's car got robbed, you go to the Pir, allegedly he's going to tell you where the car is. The ulama have said that from the kahana, the kahin is an arraf, and arraf claims he can tell you the whereabouts of things which are stolen. وحديث من أتى كاهنا يشمل العراف والمنجمة. And then Imam Ibn Abidin, or rather Imam Ibn al-Athir rahimahullah, he says the hadith that mentions the severity of going to a kahin is inclusive of both the arraf, the person who does this, and the astrologer both. So that was practitioner. So in this world where you have these evil and haram ulum, you have people who claim they can tell you the determine the whereabouts of something which is stolen. They can tell you things about themselves. They have these beings that tell them things. That's practitioner. Then you have the process. So in the world of the Pirs and the Amilin, you have Hisab Kitab. You write things, I'm going to go through in detail, but write things whatever and I'll find out things about you. One of the ulum the author of Dhur mentions is haram, is ilmul harf, the knowledge of al-harf. Al-Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah, and this is in fact is from Al-Imam al-Tahtawi, he gives some possibilities as to what the author is referring to when he says ilmul harf. The first he says يحتمل أن المراد به جمع حروف يخرج منها دلالة على حركات. The first could be that he means by ilmul harf, when you bring letters together and you extract some kind of meaning from it that tells you something about something else. ويحتمل أن المراد علم أسرار الحروف بأوفاق الاستخدام وغير ذلك. Another possibility is this can be referring to علم الأوفاق. علم الأوفاق. Firstly, let me tell you the hukm. Based on this passage, if we're understanding it correctly, the Hanafis do not deem it permissible. The Malikis do not deem it permissible. Imam Qarrafi, in fact, said it's a type of sihr. The Hanabila don't deem it permissible. Al-Imam As-Suyuti rahimahullah in Al-Ishbah wal-Nadha'ir, in Al-Kitab al-Rabi', when he discusses those ulum which are haram, says ilm al-harf is amongst them. There's only one fatwa from Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Haytami rahimahullah where he says al-awfaq is permissible if performed to a permissible end. And he attributes the science to Al-Imam al-Ghazali. But this passage he's citing from Imam al-Qarrafi. Now I have an opinion based on my research and what I read, because there's certain disparities in the style in which that was cited, or whether this is actually part of the Fatawa Hadithiyya, or whether the Nasikhin made a mistake in the manuscript. But even putting that aside, awfaq is not what these people are practicing. If awfaq is real, it's an ilm which is for the awliya, like Hujjatul Islam al-Ghazali. It was known through kashf and dhawq. It's not a science that was written in books, and it's certainly not what these people are practicing. So, hisab, kitab, numbers, letters, bringing them together, taking out things, process. Now product. So you've gone to the amil, he's done the hisab or whatever else he'll do. Now he's going to give you the Tawiz. The last thing Al-Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah says, what ilmul harf can mean, وَيَحْتَمِلُ أَنَّ الْمُرَادَ التِّلِّسْمَاتِ. It's possible that what's meant is talismans. But what do we mean exactly by talismans? هي كما في شرح اللقاني نقش أسماء خاصة لها تعلق بالأفلاك والكواكب على زعم أهل هذا العلم من المعادن أو غيرها تحدث لها خاصة ربطت بها في مجال العادات. Talismans are, the people of this knowledge say, to make certain inscriptions on gemstones or in fact on anything else, with the belief that they have a link to celestial constellations, orbits, etc. And that by way of aada, that if you write it and this particular planet is in this particular point, something happens. The important thing to note is they say fi majari al-aadat. Some people will say that these ta'weez which have these things are permissible so long as you don't believe that the planet or the star itself is effectuating and has power. The fact he's mentioning aadat shows that they're recognizing that even if you say it's by way of just that is how it happens, but it's not intrinsic ta'thir, it's still haram. It's not permissible. So you had practitioner, process and product, amil, hisab kitab, ta'weez, kahana or tanjim, awfaq or ilm al-harf, and then tilismat. So this was all from the Hashiyah. So now from the Hashiyah of Imam Ibn Abidin, it's very clear. All of those things are impermissible. That's the Hanafi position, no question. Now let's come to the Shafi'i madhab, the madhab of Imam Shafi'i radiyallahu anh. Al-Fatawa al-Hadithiyya of Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Haytami rahimahullah. This is the Turkish edition, the same publishing house that prints the works of Al-Ghawth al-A'zam rahimahullah, page 105. One of the Fatawa, the questioner says or asks, أن كتابة الأسماء التي لا يعرف معناها والتوسل بها هل ذلك مكروه أو حرام? Can we write out names that we don't know what they mean and do tawassul with them, or write them out and use them as ta'weez? Is that makruh or is that haram? وهل هو مكروه في الكتابة والتوسل بتلك الأسماء التي لا يعرف معناها أو حرام فيها? Or is it haram and makruh in one but not the other? Or is one makruh and the other is haram and vice versa, meaning writing or reading and doing tawassul? أو حرام في التوسل دون الكتابة or vice versa. فقد نقل عن الغزالي رحمه الله أنه لا يهل لشخص أن يقدم على أمر حتى يعلم حكم الله فيه. For it's been transmitted from Hujjatul Islam al-Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, it's not permissible for an individual to proceed into any matter until he knows the hukm, the judgment of Allah within that matter, meaning concerning that matter. وهل فرق في ذلك بين ما يوجد في كتب الصالحين كعبد الله بن أسعد اليافعي وغيره أم لا? And then do we make a distinction that if you have a book by someone who's known to be from the Salihin like Al-Imam al-Yafi'i, and we find a name that we don't know the meaning in his book, do we accept that and not accept it from others? So three things rather. Can you write like a ta'weez with a name that you don't know what it means? Can you do tawassul with it? And if it's in the book of one of the pious ulama, can you practice it? Can you use it just because it's found in their books? Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he answers with citation of a fatwa of Imam Izz ibn Abd al-Salam. He says, أن كتب الحروف المجهولة للأمراض لا يجوز الاسترقاء بها ولا الرقي بها. Writing any names, if you don't know the meaning of them, you cannot do ruqya with it, you cannot seek shifa with it, nothing. It's impermissible. You further on in the fatwa, he mentions, answering now the second point, hypothetically we find something like this in a book of an alim who's trustworthy, ilman wa deenan, in knowledge and in his religion, i.e. piety. Why the need to mention knowledge? It's not enough that somebody was just a pious man and he said it's okay and you can read it. He had to have been an alim, and we're not talking about contemporary ulama, we're talking about traditional ulama. He had to have been an alim, well known, trustworthy. But additionally, فإن أمر بكتابتها أو قراءتها احتمل القول بالجواز حينئذ. So it's a pious man, he was an alim, he wrote in his book, he expressly prescribed it to be written down as a ta'weez or to be recited. This scenario carries the possibility, the qawl of permissibility in that case. Two things I should clarify here. One, he still said it only carries a possibility of being jaiz. He's not saying it's mutlaqan permissible in that regard. Two, I guarantee you can check far and wide in the books of the ulama. You're not likely, maybe one or two perhaps, and that's, I'm only guessing, you're not likely to find any example of this where an alim has written a word that the meaning is not known and he said read it, this is the word, read it like this. You won't find it. You don't find it in the works of Al-Ghawth al-A'zam, Imam Abu Hassan al-Shadhili, Imam Ibn Ata'illah, any of these awliya. You won't find this. لأن أمره بذلك الظاهر أنه لم يصدر منه إلا بعد إحاطته واطلاعه على معناها. He gets, in that case, if an alim has done that and he's talking in hypothetics, we'd say he wouldn't have done that except after knowing and researching what the meaning of the word is, and thus he said it. And in that case we'd maybe say that there's nothing wrong with that. This fatwa is very important because one thing that's become particularly common, and for some reason in recent times people are treating it as if it's an exception to all these other rules. People are wearing ta'aweez that say Ya Badduh, or they have in their home Ya Badduh. It's so bad now, there's a masjid in Birmingham, they made a mihrab, on the mihrab they put Ya Badduh. What does Ya Badduh mean? We don't know. We can't say it's the name of Allah, we don't know. We can't say it's the name of anything else, in fact. We don't know what Ya Badduh means. That masjid, I have a friendly relationship with the brother who runs a masjid, and I said to him, this is not permissible. You have the Asma'ullah, why would you put Ya Badduh on the mihrab? You could have put Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Malik, Ya Quddus, the Asma'ullah. He said, we respect the ulama, but our Shaykh told us this name has many openings relating to it. I'm not saying his Shaykh was a bad person. And by him not accepting what his Shaykh said, it's not implying his Shaykh is a bad or evil person. If Hafidh ibn Hajar can say this about the Salihin, that if you find it in their book, but it doesn't have very express conditions, you don't take it. So what if someone's Shaykh said it, maybe he heard it from somebody and he thought it was good. He wasn't an alim. It's not an attack on the person, but this is haram. You can't have Ya Badduh. Halikan, Malikan, Talikan. Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan rahimahullah was asked about this in Fatawa Afriqiyya. He said this is not permissible. This was his fatwa also. He says, وَإِن ذَكَرَهَا, but this bit is important now. وَإِن ذَكَرَهَا عَلَى سَبِيلِ الْحِكَايَةِ عَنِ الْغَيْرِ الَّذِي لَيْسَ هُوَ كَذَلِكَ أَوْ ذَكَرَهَا وَلَمْ يَأْمُرْ بِقِرَاءَتِهَا وَلَا تُعْرَضُ لِمَعْنَاهَا. If, however, an alim mentioned it in his book, and he's just mentioning that somebody else said something about it, he doesn't give any prescription to read it or write it, neither has this name ever been investigated, meaning it's the object, it's been investigated, in that case we would say it still remains haram. He's talking about major ulama and awliya and salihin, that even if you find it in their book, it's not a judgment on them. For all we know, the nasikh who was writing the book and the makhtuta added something, made a mistake. It's decisa. He says many authors you'll find like this, they mention things in their books, they don't investigate it, they don't have any experience with it, they simply just mention it because maybe the person who uses it will benefit from it. And that's why he says, for this reason you'll find in the wird of Imam al-Yafi'i rahimahullah many things where he lists benefits and unique qualities. لا يجد مستعملها منها شيئا. The person will read these awrad, he doesn't get any of those benefits. وَإِن تَزَكَّتَ عَمَالُهُ وَصَفَتْ سَرِيرَتُهُ. Even if he's a pious, clean-hearted person, meaning the barrier is not that he's not fulfilling the conditions of acceptance of dua, etc. So we know from that and we learn from that, not everything in these books is from tajriba, is from experience, or from sanad, from a wali. He says, وَمَعَ ذَلِكَ تَجِدُ الْمِئَةَ مَا يَصِحُ مِنْهَا وَاحِدٌ. Because like this, sometimes you'll find 100 benefits for a particular thing to read, not one is even true. So it doesn't matter even if it's in the book of a pious person and it's not reflective of what's in their books. If there's no express prescription, you don't practice it. And I can guarantee you, you will not find anything like this in the books of the Salihin and in the books of the awliya. Something to remember when I get onto the next section, why I'm not going to mention some of the books that I'm quoting from and showing the Tawiz process and Khurafat and Bid'at, for a number of reasons, but one of them being, some of these books will say, oh, this is from Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, this is from this wali, that wali. Somebody can read that and then have bad dhann about those awliya, that they were giving these weird and sometimes a'mal that have khurafat and worse in it. But this is the principle, this is the standard that we apply. And for most of these things, they don't even have sanad, they're just saying, oh, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani said it, this Shaykh said it, this Shaykh said it, this Shaykh said it. It has no basis, no sanad. In the same work, this is the 71st fatwa. He cites Al-Imam Ibn Abi Zayd rahimahullah, and he says, this is a question to Imam Ibn Abi Zayd, whoever claims he knows the jinn and he has books and he uses those books to summon jinn and their leaders, and he can use the jinn to possess a person, and he can use the jinn to convince the evil jinn to leave a person who's possessed, and he can untie sihr done between a husband and wife, and he writes a ta'weez to make love between a husband and wife, and he thinks that he can kill jinn. أَفِي هَذَا بَأْسٌ إِذَا كَانَ لَا يُؤْذِي أَحَدًا. That is this permissible so long as he's not harming anybody? So the question is asking, if somebody does this, he's not harming anyone, is this permissible? So from this principle we learn the ends never justifies the means. Even if a person uses ta'weez and says it works, it doesn't justify the means to do it. And is this permissible so long as he doesn't harm anyone, or should we be prohibiting it and prohibiting learning and teaching this? He says, Qultu, this is the same as what our Shaykh rejected. Now meaning our Shaykh, he rejected this, it's not allowed. But this line is important now. وَالصَّوَابُ أَنَّ التَّقَرُّبَ إِلَى الرُّوحَانِيَةِ وَخِدْمَةِ مُلُوكِ الْجَانِ مِنَ السِّحْرِ. Inclining towards ruhaniyah. So you'll hear this often with these Pirs and Amils, we're doing ruhaniyat. Or these Maulvis can't understand this, it's ruhaniyat. He says to incline, to get close to that, and then to serve, or at least claim you're serving the kings of the jinn. This is all sihr, it's magic. One thing, and again I'll clarify this a number of times as I go on, most of these Pirs aren't even doing the wrong stuff properly. It's just the fraud, they're not even doing the wrong stuff properly. So they're not talking to jinns and they're not controlling jinns. They can't control their wives, how are they going to control jinns? He says, هو الذي أضل الحاكم العبيدية لعنه الله حتى ادعى الألوهية. He says this is the same thing which misguided Al-Hakim Al-Abidi. He was a former leader, non-Ahlul Sunnah, a Khalifa or a Sultan, that he got into this practice and he ended up claiming that he was God. That's how evil this practice is. And the strange thing is, I'm not saying these Pirs are claiming uluhiyah, But you'll see a lot of these Pirs who even lyingly claim that they're doing this, the takabbur in them, arrogance that develops in them, undermining people. Undermining people, and more so when they start undermining ulama. Maulvis don't know anything, ulama don't know anything. This is ruhaniyat. They don't know anything. It's takabbur. I'm going to speak about more of that in the coming section. Fatwa 72 in the Fatawa. He's asked that there is a man who writes this ta'weez that makes love between a husband and his wife. If a husband has fallen out with his wife, he'll make the husband fall in love with her, and she's sufficed of his evil. Answer. أما بين الزوجين. So now Al-Imam Al-Haytami is citing another scholar, and then he's going to give his own comments. أما بين الزوجين فأرجو أن يكون حقيقا بكتب القرآن وغيره مما لا يستنكر ولا يشترط في جعله. So this particular scholar, it's not clear who he is citing, says, as for between two spouses, then I wish that there's nothing wrong with that, so long as they write the Quran and something else, so long as that something else is not something which is rejected, and he doesn't stipulate a price for it. He can't say, give me this much money and I'll sell you this ta'weez. قلت. This is now Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar saying this. وهذا خلاف ما تقدم له إلا أن يقال. He says there's some disparity between this and what this alim said previously. إن هذا بالرقى الظاهرة الحسن كرقي أبي سيد الخدري رضي الله عنه سيد الحي الملدوخة بالفاتحة. The point he's making is that this author, this scholar, should have made it abundantly clear. This is only if it's a ruqya which is unanimously accepted in Islam, like reciting the Fatiha that Sayyidina Abu Sa'id al-Khudri did over the leader of the tribe when he was stung for shifa. This shows how scrupulous and how meticulous the ulama were, that even the previous fatwa was pretty clear. Hafiz ibn Hajar is making sure that he leaves no room for anybody to open any door. That let's make it clear, it's only Quran, nothing else. He says, وَمَذْهَبُنَا فِي ذَلِكَ. This is now Hafiz ibn Hajar. أن كل عزيمة مقروءة أو مكتوبة إن كان فيها اسم لا يعرف معناه فهي محرمة الكتابة والقراءة. And we'll break for Salatul Isha. We'll continue after Salatul Isha, inshaAllah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we finished before Salatul Isha on the Fatawa of Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Haytami rahmahullah ta'ala. And the last fatwa is when he stated the position of the Shafi'i method that anything recited or written, if it has a name whose meaning is unintelligible, you don't understand it, you can't comprehend it, it's haram to write it, it's haram to recite it, regardless whether you're using it on somebody who's possessed or otherwise. If, however, it has the names of Allah, the ayatul Quran, the names of Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam or Malaika, then that's permissible to both recite it upon somebody who's possessed and otherwise, and to write it. He finishes this particular fatwa saying, وَمَا عَدَى ذَلِكَ مِنَ التَّبْخِيرَاتِ وَالتَّدْخِينَاتِ وَنَحْوِهِمَا مِمَّا اعْتَادَهُ السَّحْرَةُ الْفَجْرَةُ الْحَرَامُ السِّرْفُ بَلِ الْكَبِيرَةُ بَلِ الْكُفْرُ بِتَفْصِيلِهِ الْمَشْهُورِ عِنْدَنَا وَمُطْلَقًا عِنْدَ مَالِكٍ وَغَيْرِهِ. This is a very important point to remember, because it'll be coming up again when I give a demonstration on what these people do. Everything other than that, he says. For example, when they would say you use certain bukhur, certain perfumes for certain things, and you have to use smoke for certain things, and things of this kind that the transgressive and evil magicians do, is pure haram. In fact, it's a major sin. In fact, if you look at the detail of it, it's kufr according to us, i.e. the Shafi'is, and just in its broadest sense, it's kufr. Imam Malik and others. In another fatwa from Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Haytami from the same work, the questioner asked regarding a pious man, so meaning a genuinely pious man. He writes ta'weez, he does ruqya, and he does nashra, and he cures people who have insanity, who are afflicted with jinn. He uses the names of Allah, but he also uses khawatim and aza'im, meaning he also uses ta'weez. And the people benefit from that, and he doesn't take any money for that. Is that permissible? Hafiz ibn Hajar in this fatwa, he says, وَأَمَّا مُعَالَجَةُ الْمَسْرُوءِ بِالْجُنُونِ بِالْخَوَاتِمِ وَالْعَزَائِمِ فَفِعْلُ الْمُبْتِلِينَ. As for curing people who are possessed with jinn, using khawatim and aza'im, meaning talismans and ta'weez, this is the deed of the liar. فإنه من المنكر والباطل الذي لا يفعله ولا يشتغل به من فيه خير أو دين. This is from the munkar, that which is rejected and batil, patently void, and nobody will occupy himself with this if he has any khair or any deen in him. فإن كان هذا الرجل جاهلا بما عليه في هذا فينبغي أن ينهى عنه ويبصر فيما عليه فيه حتى لا يعود إلى الاشتغال به. This last line of the fatwa is the distinction between us and the Khawarij, ISIS type Khawarij. There was a case a number of years ago. There was an Imam up north, I believe, Bengali Imam. He was writing Tawiz. 2 Khariji ISIS members took him and murdered him. We're not calling for killing people who write Tawiz or harming people who write Tawiz. What does Hafidh ibn Hajar say? If this man, the pious man who's believed to be pious amongst his people, is a jahil, meaning he's just a person, he doesn't know he's writing Tawiz, but he's doing good as well, it's necessary, he's prohibited from doing so. You show him what's wrong with this so that he doesn't go back to it. Simple. You tell the person what's wrong with it, why it's haram, so he doesn't go back to it. Now citing a more contemporary source, or closer to our times at least. There's a sheikh from Egypt, former sheikh, Sheikh Muhammad Zaki Ibrahim, rahimahullah. He was a contemporary of Imam Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi, rahimahullah. He was a Sufi, and in fact he was known as Muhaddith al-Sufiya, the Muhaddith of the Sufis. But he was one of those Sufis and men of Tariqah who challenged the bid'at that were found in the name of Tariqah. His father has a book, Al-Marji'. Sheikh Zaki Ibrahim did ikhtisar of the Marji', and he gave notes. The book Marji' was on bid'at in the names of Tasawwuf. So he mentions, Qadi Iyad says, أجمعوا على جواز الرقي بكتاب الله وعلى منئها بالأسماء العجمية. There is an ijma' on the permissibility of doing ruqya with the book of Allah and its impermissibility with non-Arab names. Why? Out of fear أن تكون كفرا أو سحرا أو نحوه. There's a fear that it could be sihr or kufr or something like this, like we mentioned before. Shaykh Zaki Ibrahim and his father give a stark warning to the people who engage in these things. He says on the next page, وَقَلَّ أَن يَمُوتَ وَاحِدٌ مِّنْهُمْ إِلَّا بَعْدَ الْفَقْرِ وَالْفَدِيحَةِ وَالْمَرَضِ وَسُوءِ الْحَالِ نَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ السَّلَامَةَ وَالْعَفْوَ. That the people who engage in this and they make it a means of earning a livelihood, very rarely will any of them die except after he experiences poverty and disgrace and illness and a tremendously bad state. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from that. With regards to permissible ta'weez, even then he says وَيَجِبُ إِخْفَاءُ الرُّقْيَةِ أَوِ الْهِرْزِ الْمَحْمُولِ أَنِ الْأَعْيُنِ كَمَا قَالَهُ صَاحِبُ الْمَدْخَلِ. If a person wears a legitimate ta'weez, even then, Al-Imam Ibn al-Hajj al-Maliki rahimahullah said he must hide the ta'weez. There used to be a time growing up where people used to say ta'weez is a sign of your sunniyat. It shows that you're a sunni. And they would argue with the Mutawwa and the Haramain when the Mutawwa would tell them to take their ta'weez off. And if you're wearing a ta'weez, you're telling people you're ill or there's something wrong with you. Why would you show that to people? The fatwa is you hide the ta'weez, even the permissible ta'weez, you hide the ta'weez. And then he finishes on page 38, really answering something which everybody always asks. He says, the ulama, أن العلماء سدا للذراع أغلقوا هذا الباب عن العامة. The ulama, to prevent any further harm with these spiritual healers, good or bad, they close this door to the layman entirely. They just close the door entirely. Why? People can't make any distinction between pious people, impious people, real, fake, those who are just making an earning out of this and a living, and those who are looking to help them. So the ulama say stay away from this entirely. Now what I want to go through is that's, I think, more than enough references to make the standpoint of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah clear. The only ta'weez which is permissible is with Quran, dhikrullah, dua, and anything of that kind. Threads, nuqush, and all of these other things are impermissible. So that's abundantly clear now, the standpoint of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Now what I'd like to go through is what is the actual process that these so-called Pirs and Amilin do. Remember, 99.99% of them aren't even doing this. They're just lying and scribbling and giving you papers. Maybe 1 in 10,000 is doing it the right way, maybe. But one thing that they remain adamant on, that this ruhaniyat and this science, the ulama don't know it. Some of the books that I used to prepare this for even says that this is beyond the idrak and faham of the ulama. It's such a complex science. That's why when we say what we've just said over the last who knows how many hours, they'll say that these Maulvis don't understand it. I'm going to go through the exact process from beginning to end and what these Amilin do. I've gathered this from books which are considered foundational cornerstones in this science, in this practice, wherever you wish to call it, that other books take from. Some of the books I've taken from are from what people would deem to be reputable and credible tariqas, meaning people respect, people who don't believe that they're charlatans. And then from other things, Shaykh Asrar some time ago gave me a bag full of confiscated Tawiz books from Khalifas who left their Pir. So handwritten manuals from these Pirs. So you couldn't get closer to what these people are doing. Again, I'm not going to mention the tariqah on individuals for two reasons. One, people won't be able to transcend the conversation and just see that I'm attacking their Pir. Two, if I mention a book, I don't want to socialize the books amongst people. People can go use them for the wrong reason. Three is they may see the name of a genuine scholar or wali in there and have su'u dhan of that wali, even though it's not a true attribution. So the first thing is, how does an amil become an amil? What does he have to do? How does he qualify to say, now I'm an amil? There are 9 general principles that are agreed on. The first is the amil should not commence any ritual until he ensures he is consuming on illicit provision and maintains a lofty resolve. Upon initiating the ritual, the amil should stave off the whispers of Satan and continuously assess the state of his heart. Outwardly that looks pretty reasonable for anything. Have good intentions, do well, eat halal. If the ritual is to be performed, meaning the amal is to be performed over a certain number of days, then the amil should adopt absolute veganism. For doing so guarantees to a greater degree the acceptance of one's supplications. In fact, one should additionally endeavor to abandon the consumption of pungent foods like onions in that period too. How many Pirs do you know are vegans? How many Pirs can even control their diets that don't be vegans? They're not doing this. Depending on the nature of the ritual, i.e. jalali or jamali, one must ensure its performance, if performed over a course of time, is performed at the same time daily. Failure to do so impacts the efficacy of the amal, of the ritual. Number 4, one must perform the daily ritual at the exact same spot. Number 5, it's better to commence a ritual at the zenith or ascent of a constellation or one of the zodiac cycles rather than at its decline or descent. Number 6, before commencing, one should recite Fatiha, Ayatul Kursi, the 4 quls and salawat, and create a protective circle, a da'ira around himself, which in English is known as casting a circle. Number 7, one should without fail recite his zakat 7 times or more daily. So these amilin will say, certain amal you do, you have to recite a zakat to balance out the effects of it. So you have to do that every day. Number 8, one must be authorized from the author of the amal to perform the amal, otherwise it stands to harm him. And number 9, the amil must be well informed, educated and vigilant of the zodiac cycle. So remember all the things that we mentioned previously. So he has to fulfill these 9 first before he can even begin amaliyat, even in the wrong sense. This is the prerequisite before becoming an amil. Then some of the other things mentioned when they talk about lawazimatul nuqush is the pen that you use. So you have to use a reed pen, meaning you can't use a biro or an ink pen. It has to be purchased from halal income. They must try their best to use a different pen for every amal. The amount of amals is these Pirs, right? I don't think that'd be possible to buy a new pen for every single amal. That if they can't use a new pen, they use one for sa'ad a'mal and one for bakhs a'mal. One for good things, one for bad things. Have at least 2 separate pens. When they cut the reed pen, the nib of it, they give them certain Quran and salawat to recite. If you're going to use the pen for good, you face it towards you and then you cut the nib. If you're going to use it for bad, you face it against you and you cut the nib. Once you've cut the nib, you've made the pen. Depending on where you are on the zodiac cycle, on the tip of the nail of one of your fingers, you have to write certain letters. So if it's Qamar Burd Atishi, you have to write Ahda Mashfaz. If it's another Yawman Qadiz, Kharman Fasaz, Wahal Barhiti. So you have to write this on the tip of your nail. If you do this, Every amal you do will work and work quick. So obviously the Pirs aren't doing this because none of these amals seem to be working for anybody. If you do this, the amal will work very quick. Then the ink. There are two types of inks for Tawiz. One is for good Tawiz, one is for bad Tawiz. One red, one black. Then the paper. If you're doing a good Tawiz, you use white. For bad, a different color, etc. For something that's going to elicit anger, red. Then what you wrap it in. That the wrapping must be in color according to what the Tawiz was for. Number 5, now remember Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah said, anything besides this from perfumes and the use of smoke is what the magicians do. Number 5 is bukhur. If it's this sign like Taurus, Aries, etc., you use this one. If it's this sign, you use this one. If it's this size, you use this one. The ulama said this is what the Sahara do. This is what the magicians do. So now this Amil, he's fulfilled the prerequisites. He has his instruments, he has his tools. Now it's about the setting where you usually find them. Now we can mention a million of them from anecdotes that we all know, but there's a book of Sheikh Jamaluddin al-Qasimi. Sheikh Jamaluddin al-Qasimi was a scholar from the last 100 years in Syria, Sham. Admittedly, he did have some unorthodox positions. He wasn't a Wahhabi, but he inclined towards the positions of Ibn Taymiyyah. I'd admit that, lest anyone say we're quoting Wahhabis. However, ulama held him in high regard because he was a specialist in ilm al-hadith, and because for his historical input he had some very good observations on history in Sham and what was happening in Sham in his time. By madhab, he was a Shafi'i. He was pro-Mawlid, he performed Mawlid, he was a very big fan of Imam al-Ghazali, he did Ikhtisar of the Ihya. So he wasn't a Wahhabi, but he did have unorthodox positions. We'll admit that. But I'm citing him for historic reference. He has a book, Islahul Masajid and al-Bid'i wal-Awa'id, freeing the masajid or cleaning the masajid of bid'at. One of the chapters in here is Dararu Iqamat al-Raqi fi Hujjar al-Masajid, the dangers of putting a Raqi in one of the rooms in the masjid, an Amil or a Pir, keeping him in the masjid. He says you find in some masajid, he was talking about Syria, people go to this room and there's a man in there who claims he knows the unseen and he can tell you about the future. So people will go to him because they say they have amrad wahmiya or waswasiya, meaning they're just mentally ill people or they have waswasa. And he convinces them there's no cure except for tabiyyut al-athar, khat, ram, all the things we said are haram. Even he says, oil hisab, or we have to do hisab, or we have to look in water. This was a practice known as mandal. They would look in water and allege that they can see things from the water. Or we have to write certain names on the bottom of your foot. Or we have to use a woman's period blood and write it on her stomach. Or we have to use the woman's water, you can imagine what that means, and write it on her stomach. Among so many other muharramat that these people would do. He has another work, which was in fact his father's work, As-Sana'atu Shamiyya. His father wrote an index of all of the trades and industries in Sham in his time, by alphabetical order. Sheikh Jamaluddin then wrote an addendum to it. Certain things he felt his father missed out. One of the things he puts in there is Raqi, basically Pir, that this is the biggest trade in Syria at the moment, becoming a Pir. He says these Pirs, these Raqi, that most of their custom comes from women, and then feeble-minded men. And they'll say we have waswasa, we have illnesses that don't go away, we have dreams that scare us, someone robbed our money, someone robbed our jewelry, and they ask for ta'weed and other things from them. He says, كَثُرَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحِرْفَةِ الدَّجَّالُونَ وَالْمُتَكَحِّنُونَ وَالْجَهَرَةُ كَثْرَةً عَجِيبَةً نِسَاءً وَرِجَالًا. He says it's amazing just how many people are getting into this industry. Dajjals, fortune tellers, ignoramuses, men and women. And he says the belief of the people is still strong as it ever was. رغما أن أخذ القون بالتنبه والترقي الأفكار, despite the fact that the rest of mankind have become advanced in their thinking, technologically advanced, our people are still believing in this. ولكن لا عجب, he says, but it's no surprise. فهل يخلو الكون من الحمقاء والأغرار والمغفلين? Has there ever been a time where people or existence was without dunces, idiots and fools? هيهات. No. فما دام هؤلاء في هذا الوجود كانت معيشة أولئك عليهم. So long as these idiots exist, the salary of those people is always going to be on their head. And he mentioned some examples of what people had told it in Sham at that time. That there was a man who would write a ta'weed, or he would write an amal for women, and he would say to them, it's only going to work if I write on your stomach. So he would write these words on women's stomachs, act like he's made a mistake so he could lick his tongue, and so he can rub and touch the woman. So he'd write, and I've made a mistake, just so he could touch the woman. Another man said to a woman, this ta'weed can only be written with two waters, that of a man and a woman, and he convinced her to commit zina with him. Which is not shocking, we've already covered this here in the UK. He said, one of the salih, the pious Iraqis told me himself, meaning this is a good pious one, who chose never to do ruqya to women. But he was forced one time, someone brought a woman to him. He said, she didn't speak to me except I felt aroused and attracted to her. So he says, pay attention, if this is the pious one, imagine the rest of them. If this is the pious Iraqi, imagine the state of the rest of them. And he says the least evil that comes out of this is that people are just lying, they're just beguiling and frauding people. He says even if these Pirs and these Amils, he calls them Iraqis of course, had studied astrology and astronomy, at least with them we could say they're practicing astrology, we could have a conversation with them at least. Like I said, most of them are just fraud, they're not even doing the wrong correctly. He said in that sense we could at least have a conversation. We could sit them down and say, what are you studying, what are you looking at? What's the astronomy behind what you do? What's the astrology behind what you do? Not validating it, but saying that at least be a discussion to be had. But he says these people, there's no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no deen, there's no taqwa. There's nothing with these people. So that's the general culture you find these people embedded in. And he finishes this passage by saying, if a person has free time and he wanted to write about fake Pirs and what they do and how they trick people and what they do with women, he could fill volumes full just with their stories. So that's the prerequisites, the instruments and tools, the culture. Now onto what is it that actually happens when you go to a Pir. So you go to a Pir, you say, I've got illness, I'm not feeling well, I've got a problem, I've got a Jinn. The first thing they do is hisab. What's hisab? Hisab, generally speaking, Fulan comes to me, I say, give me your name and your mother's name. I take the numerological value, the numerical value of the names, let's say it's 25, hypothetically. I divide that number, now there are different methods, some say divided by 3, divided by 7, divided by this, divided by that. One method, like in this book, which some of the Arab Amilin do, is divide by this number, then divide by 3. Eventually, you'll get a number from 1 to 3. If it's 1, it's sihr, 2, it's nazar, 3, it's ayn. 1, it's sihr, 2 is jinn, 3 is ayn. Firstly, tell me this, is every number divisible by whatever number they're going to give you? What if you get a decimal? First. Secondly, the numerical value of a person's name, when does it ever change? So from the point that they gave this poor thing a name, he said, nazar, sihr, ayn. Then what happens if he changes his name? Does that mean that changes as well? There's no rhyme or reason to this. If your number is 25, it's always 25. It's always going to show one of these things. It makes no sense whatsoever. Another one is that they say, when I asked somebody about this, somebody who used to practice this, he said, no, what they mean is, let's say it's sihr. So some of them have a table, a longer table with a lot of numbers on there. Let's say the number, 24 is for cancer. What that means is if in his life he ever gets cancer, it'll be because of magic. We're not saying it is magic, we're saying if he gets cancer, it'll be because of magic. Which again is ridiculous. So that's the first thing, hisab, and there's honestly nothing more to say about that. It's that stupid and that nonsensical. Then what they will do is when, the guys come, he's given the Pir, the Amil, his name, they've got the number, they know the problem, they've done the diagnostics. Now I've got to determine what's the right cure for him. So they'll take the name again. In most instances, they'll divide by 12 according to the symbols in the zodiac sign. Depending on the number they get, 1 to 12 in the end, they look at this, which is known as Da'iratul Buruj, the zodiac cycle. So let's say they get this one, they look down, allegedly it'll tell you about the nature of the person, what suits him best, what kind of ta'weed. Then they claim that there is a muwakkal associated with each one of these segments of the cycle. In 20 years of asking people what is a muwakkal, nobody can tell me what's a muwakkal. One person says it's a jinn, one person says it's an angel, one person says it's something else, but it's some being that they've got control of that can come and tell them things and do all the rest of it. Remember when we were giving the definitions from the Hashiyah, the fortune teller is the one who claims he has a being that follows him, that gives him news. I'll go into muwakkalat a bit more, but even this is a control mechanism that's baked into this process, which is what? I make you believe things, that there's this vocabulary and there's this stuff and there's these ideas, and I make you believe them and you believe it. And this is common in cults and in any groups, subversive groups that control people. Again, I take you back to Scientology, from the book Going Clear, about L. Ron Hubbard. How did he control mentally his followers? From this second-hand knowledge, Hubbard saw the need for creating a special vocabulary which would allow him to define old thoughts in new ways. The soul became a thetan, for instance. Or invent new words such as interbulate, confuse, and hatting, training. Or use words and phrases in a novel manner, such as turning adjectives or verbs into nouns, or vice versa. An overt, static, alter isness, plus a pentagon-level glut of acronyms, all of which would entrap his followers in a self-referential semantic labyrinth. You imprison people in their own thoughts. There's a Saya on you, there's a Hamzat on you. What do any of these things mean? To date, nobody can define and tell what these things mean. So they look at the Da'iratul Buruj. And I say this in all honesty, every book on Amaliyat I read preparing this, they tell you 3 dislocated things and don't even tell you how you're meant to end up writing the Ta'weed in the end. They give you 10 pages on principles and then just say, here the Ta'weez copy them. So what was the point of even telling people this? Why? It's a fraud, it doesn't work, it's not real. Even as sihr or evil or ulum, it's not real. So then they'll take Da'iratul Nujum, a second da'ira again. Let's look for the muwakkal, let's look for the letter. Then they look at other things, okay, what numbers are we using? That number has a particular, another number associated with it. Once we've looked at that, now we're going to look at the schedule. So now I'm going to look at the day. Then I'm going to look at the hour. It's this day, it's this hour. That means I have to focus on this zodiac cycle. Then what kind of ta'weez is it? Atshi, Badi, Khaki, Abi, water, wind, earth, fire. It depends on the nature of the person. I'm going to write the ta'weez according to that. Again, every book will tell you this, and then you just say the ta'weez, not write it. You want to get rich as a ta'weez, just copy. So they're not even doing the wrong correctly. One of the processes, when I looked at how to write like a Khaki ta'weez, for some reason it's an earth-based ta'weez, he does all this process. He has to go to natural earth, he has to make the inscription on the earth, then he does something with the inscription. Which bead is going to do that for anyone who comes to it? How many beads that take? It take a week to write one ta'weez the wrong way like that. But I just want to show you now, bringing this section on ta'weez almost to a close. These are some ta'weez, the worst I can find, that are being given to people. And these are genuinely not from fringe books, these are from books, from tariqas that are meant to be reputable in the subcontinent. So you remember I said the ulama said, Qiwala or Tuwala, a ta'weez of sort to fast the love between a husband and a woman is haram. They only allowed it if it's Quran. Anything other than that, it's impermissible. This is a ta'weez that alleges to foster love between two people. They say you write it, you place it in a fire pit, and you let it burn in there. Look at the Naqsh, Fir'aun, Namrud, Shaddad, Iblis. So remember, even with this burning idea, Hafiz ibn Hajar said this tadkhinat, this burning and all the rest of it, because some of the things they say with this, no, these are bad names, so we burn them. When the bad names burn, the jinn feels bad that their masters are burning, but this is to make two people fall in love with each other, allegedly. Under the Naqsh it says Azazil Shaitan. Azazil is what some tafsirs mention is the name of Iblis. I'm not going to read what's underneath, I'll translate it, it's in Farsi. I'll admit my Farsi is not perfect. I think it's good enough to understand this. If somebody says I'm reading this wrong, they can correct me. Fulan bin Fulan, the son, upon the love of Fulan bin Fulan, bewitch him, seduce him. If it's not done in a matter of hours, then 7 divorces on your mother and on your sister-in-law and 1,000 curses on you. I don't see how this can be addressing anyone other than Shaitan. They're giving Muslims ta'weed, calling out Shaitan. This is from, again, a reputable tariqah within that world. The ones you would assume aren't doing these things. When we read Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas, we ask refuge from the sharab al-waswas al-khannas. Another ta'weez for love, allegedly. Azmat, azamta, I don't know what, they don't even write them properly. Azamta, azmat, I don't know. Ya ma'ashar al-arwah, O congregation of souls. Wa sahib al-shar al-waswas al-khannas wal-'iyad billah. They're calling to the sahib of the shar, the evil of the waswas al-khannas. Junud Iblis, the armies of Iblis. Khatam Sulaiman bin Dawood alayhi salam, the seal of Sulaiman bin Dawood alayhi salam. With the haqq of Harut and Marut, wal-'iyadu billah, then they put Quran in huwa illa dhikrun lil-'alamin. They're calling out on Sahibu Sharr al-Waswas al-Khannas, the armies of Iblis, by the right of Harut and Marut. Again, this is reputable. Not some fringe book that I just found on the internet, from a reputable tariqah people trust, who are alleged to specialize in removing jinn, dealing with these issues, who allegedly are the defenders of the aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. The same ta'weez underneath, exact same thing. So from everything I mentioned, some people could say, but what's the harm? It's just numbers, it can't be that bad. This is what they're giving to people. This is what people are using as ta'weez. Remember I said that they say the arraf, an example, is someone who claims to determine the whereabouts of something which is stolen. Baraya jor, to find a thief or something which was stolen. You take an egg, you write this naqsh on the egg. You place it in fire. Now the instructions are a bit unclear. It says place it in fire, do not take it until you find the thing. If you're meant to keep that fire kindled until you find it and it takes a few days, that might be a bit difficult. So the instructions are even unclear on what you're meant to do. You put the naqsh on it. When you find the thing, you take the egg out, go and bury it in an old grave. This is what they're making Muslims do. These people claim they love the awliya of Allah. Here's a ta'weez where they call out to some of the salihin and awliya. Again, if I'm wrong with this, the people who will know what I'm talking about, belong to that tariqah, maybe are even meant to be learned people, correct me, no problem. I have no problem being corrected. If I've read something wrong, if I misunderstood something. So in this one, they have a ta'weez, they have the names of some of the salihin, even sahaba. In the middle they have Ya Khudhu Za'il. They claim to love the awliya. Now this could be a mishap in the person who is writing it, the nasir who could have made a mistake, who knows, but they should correct him. The bottom of the ta'weez, it says, Ya Abdul Qadir Jilani, O Abdul Qadir Jilani, Ati'ni, obey me. Is this ta'zeem of awliya asking Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani to obey you? This is, look, there the ta'weez. From amongst that paraphernalia and all of this bag from the secret manuals from these Pirs. This is a Pir again, highly reputable. If I were to mention him, some of you probably would think, no, he's okay, he couldn't have wrote this. This is from his own personal, handwritten ta'weez book. You'll remember, or some of you may remember, maybe 2 years ago, not this Nisf Sha'ban, the one before, Shaykh Asrar put this video on his socials. We went to Handsworth Cemetery. Some of my family and we have friends buried there. We were looking at the other graves. We did dua for all of the believers there. I saw a piece of paper under a rock. I jokingly said, oh, it looks like somebody's doing voodoo. Shouldn't have made that joke. The next 3 graves, there was a paper, there was a body, and there were certain inscriptions on them. It was voodoo, it was sihr. People watching that video, some of the comments were, do you expect us to believe this? It looks like a child drew this. Yeah, this is really sihr. This is from the manual of that Pir. Dushman ko bimar karne ka tariqa. How to make your enemy turn ill. And I'm not going to read it because he gives a process. That's what he's telling you to draw, to inscribe on something. Visualize it's your enemy, put it in this place and do this, you remain ill. Literally teaching voodoo. Reputable Pir. Reputable Pir. Not a fringe book, not some book from a weird corner of the internet. Very, very reputable Pir. And they're teaching voodoo. This is from his own handwritten manual, only given to his khalifas. Wal-'iyadu billah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from this and these people. finishing up this segment, when I mentioned, so I've mentioned what's happening in the world of amaliyat, and I've demonstrated to you exactly what happens. When I mentioned some of the things before, like talismans, ilm al-harf, etc., you could ask, well, you never gave us an example of that, what does that look like? So let me read to you, these are from books that I have personally. This is a book on occult magic, a relatively old book which I scanned to bring today. And I'm not saying, I'm not even implying this tongue-in-cheek that one took from the other or they're taking from this. I'm just saying it's for your knowledge so you know what it is. There could be similarities. Chapter 5, Talismanic Magic. The composition of talismans. So the first thing he talks about, remember we said this, Atshi, Badi, Abi, Khaki, you have to know the 4 elements. This is a book on occult magic by Kuffar. It is necessary that the student should know and understand the nature and quality of the 4 elements. Same thing. In order to be perfect in the principles and groundwork of his studies in talismanic magic. I'm not going to read all of it, but he's starting from the same starting point, same foundation. Now let me show you what in talismanic magic the inscriptions look like. I've seen probably most of these inscriptions in Tawiz. You'll have a Tawiz, so you have the naqsh, and they put some weird squiggle underneath, and I used to always wonder why are these squiggles? These squiggles are the seal of Neptune, the seal of the spirit of this, the seal of the spirit of that, meaning symbols of kufr, of false deities. Furthermore, more inscriptions. In fact, preparing this in one of these books, I found one exactly like this. I found one similar to this. I've definitely seen this in many ta'weez. 100% they make ta'weez like this also as well. Am I saying they're taking from sihr and magic? I'm just showing you what's there. Furthermore, they'll have geomantic characters. So you have ta'weez, they put a star, they put a crescent moon. Again, this is all sihr. Talismanic magic and sihr, it's in there also. Look at how in talismanic magic they actually even make their ta'weez. You can't deny it looks very similar. And this is all sihr. Then they have certain stars, logos. Again, in preparing this, I inadvertently missed these ones out. I found ta'weez with these exact logos. These are from the Kabbalah. Again, coincidence? Maybe. Overlap? Who knows? Lastly, all these things that they claim are secret ilm and people, Maulvis don't get it and ulama don't get it. Remember I showed you the jadwal of sa'at. That you have to look at the schedule and work out that it's this time, this day, this hour. It's all there in English. So look, they call it the table of names and spirit, the table of the names of spirits and planets governing the hours. So hour 1, on a particular day, Michael, Anael, Raphael, Gabriel, Cassiel, Sachiel, Samuel, Michael, Anael, Raphael, Gabriel, meaning what they would call mu'akkalat. They have in this talismanic magic the exact same thing they're using. They're using here also as well, in sihr. So that was from Western occult magic. In the subcontinent, there was a very famous pundit. He lived in pre-partition Pakistan. Though admittedly, he says that he learned this from Muslim amilin. But I'm making the point, this notion that some sacred special science, kuffar are even writing on it. Again, I'm not going to mention the names of the books. And I don't believe this individual is a Muslim. His name is Pandit something, even though he opens with the basmalah and praising Allah, but he does not praise the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Same thing. Abjad, huruf, those tables, exactly the same, no difference. Some of these tariqas have things that they call a chiragh, that we make these special candles and with inscriptions, and if you light it, it blows up all the jinns in the area. It'll blow up the jinn inside you, and chiragh is a ruhani thing, blah blah blah. How to make a chiragh. This is from a Pandit Kafir's book. Am I saying they're the same things? No, I'm just saying it's not this sacred, complex, nuanced science that only Muslims know and only Sufis know. This thing is available in books on sihr. Whether that sihr is Eastern, Western. Okay. So, all I will say, that concludes the section on Tawiz. It's very clear. Just stay away from all these Pirs and Amili. Don't go to any of them. Inshallah, in the future, We're going to have a workshop on ruqya from the sunnah, what to do from the sunnah. You come, you attend, you listen, you learn, you go practice it yourself in afterwards. Inshallah, we'll schedule that in when we have the time. Stay away from everybody. Remember, there's nothing that says you can't open a Tawiz. If someone's giving you a Tawiz, there's no law that says it's haram to open it. In fact, that's khilaf al-sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ asked the Sahaba to present him their ruqyas that they were using, some from the Jahiliyyah, to see what was in there. To be honest, none of these books that I researched for this and the Amaliyat ones actually even said you can't open the Tawiz. If you have a Tawiz, open it. You're not going to die. Your family has it, open it, look what's in there. If it's anything other than Quran or the things we mentioned, just get rid of it. Focus on the Quran, focus on the Sunnah. We have, of course, 2 more segments on graves and pirs as well. Insha'Allah, we'll continue that in the future with set a date. This was the heaviest part. This was kind of a top heavy workshop. The most detail was in this part. The next will be a lot shorter, insha'Allah ta'ala. Insha'Allah, you'll all be notified when that happens. And then we'll have the workshop on ruqya from the Quran and Sunnah as well. We pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rid us of this culture, rid us of these people, protect our families, and allow us to do amal on the Quran and Sunnah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأتوب إليه.